Chapter 1. Spring always came late in the northern frontier of the Radiant Empire. It was not until the beginning of April that the snow that had been raging for half a year finally retreated. The warm sunshine once again descended on the northern frontier, bringing with it the vitality of all living things. But it seemed that not everyone liked this kind of bright sunshine. For example, the man who had just walked out of Grey Castle. He was wearing a leather triangular hat with the brim pulled down very low, completely covering his eyes, but he still seemed to feel that the sunlight was too dazzling, so he raised his hand and pulled the brim down a bit. This man looked to be 17 or 18 years old, tall and handsome, wearing a black shirt with red stripes, scarlet cross-patterned night boots wrapped around his knees, which made his originally somewhat fluffy black trousers bulge. His almost knee-length burgundy coat made him look very noble. But his face was particularly pale, as if he had just recovered from a serious illness. Young Master Colin. Young Master Colin. Along the way, the servants of Grey Castle all saluted and greeted the man. However, this young Master Colin seemed to have a lot on his mind, and his response to the servants' greetings was somewhat perfunctory. After a moment, he finally stopped in front of a small house, as if he was hesitating whether to go in or not. Meow. In the corner, a kitten made a dissatisfied sound, as if blaming the man for blocking its sunlight. Colin Angeli came back from his contemplation, looking at the kitten at his feet, his tightly knitted eyebrows slightly relaxed, and the corner of his mouth also showed a trace of a smile. He squatted down, reached out and held the kitten in front of him. Meow. Unable to bear the humiliation, the kitten bared its fangs and brandished its claws for a while, but it was simply unable to break free from Colin's evil claws, so it accepted its fate and quieted down, only trying to open its eyes wide to stare at the stupid human in front of it. Colin's fingers gently stroked the kitten's slender neck, as if he was hesitating about something. Chi, seeing the human in front of it slowly revealing his sharp canine teeth, the kitten was not to be outdone and bared its teeth at him. One man and one cat confronted each other for a moment. Colin suddenly laughed and put the kitten back on the ground. Meow. Meow. Meow, as if it felt that it had successfully defeated the stupid human in the confrontation just now, the kitten proudly meowed a few times. Then, it skillfully lay down, turned over, and revealed its belly, indicating that the loser should quickly serve its master. Unfortunately, the stupid human did not pay any attention to it. Instead, it got up and walked into the small house. The maids who were busy in the room were surprised when they saw Colin. They quickly stopped what they were doing and asked carefully, "Young Master Colin, why are you here? Dinner will have to wait for a while. If you're hungry, we can prepare afternoon tea for you." "No need, I'm just looking around." Colin glanced around the kitchen and saw the bound reindeer in the corner. He then asked, "Is tonight's dinner venison?" "Yes, young master. Venison stew with carrots, vegetable soup, bread and butter and wine." Colin touched his chapped lips. "I don't need wine. Prepare me a cup of deer blood." "Okay." The maids were a little surprised, but they still nodded in response. In their impression, among the masters of Grey Castle, only the Baron liked to drink deer blood. Young Master Colin's taste had always been very light. After Colin finished speaking, he turned around and left. But when he reached the door, he seemed to have thought of something, so he turned back and ordered, "Also, add a portion of garlic, raw." "Yes, young master," the maids hurriedly replied. At the same time, they cursed in their hearts, "Young Master Colin's taste is really getting heavier and heavier." Night fell. The dining room on the top floor of Grey Castle was illuminated by a row of candles and the flames in the fireplace. The decoration in the hall was quite luxurious, but also had a rough atmosphere. A kite shield carved with a roaring bear's head was hung above the fireplace. The surroundings were decorated with paintings of different styles, as well as animal head specimens used to show off the master's strength. "Young master, the wine cellar just bought a few barrels of white wine from the Winst Manor a few days ago. Would you like to try it?" After the maids had set up the table, Butler Eamon stood behind Colin with his hands clasped behind his back and recommended in a low voice. Last year, the rainy season in Winst was relatively short, and there was plenty of sunlight. The quality of this batch of wine should be very good, just right for tonight's venison. After learning about young Master Colin's abnormal behavior in the kitchen today, Eamon was a little worried. In Eamon's heart, the boorish Baron Colin was already hopeless. But for young Master Colin, this butler who wholeheartedly wanted to improve the Angeli family's taste, he had high hopes. But he did not expect that young Master Colin would actually let the kitchen prepare deer blood and garlic today. Eamon felt that he had to do something. The Angeli family had to be elegant. Moved by the butler's words, Colin nodded in agreement. Eamon revealed a gratified smile and hurriedly poured a glass of white wine for Colin. "Do you need anything else?" Colin waved his hand. "No need, you can go do your work." As the butler's footsteps disappeared outside the door, only Colin was left in the spacious dining hall. His father, Baron Angeli, was away at war, his mother had passed away many years ago, and his sister was already married. So, only Colin was sitting at the long and empty dining table. But he did not seem to feel lonely at all. Quickly finishing the food in front of him, Colin drank the white wine while looking at the remaining deer blood and garlic in a daze. After finishing the glass of wine, he finally picked up the glass of deer blood, frowned slightly, and brought it to his mouth. There was no stench as expected, and he did not feel nauseous. Colin drank it all in one gulp. It was a little sweet. Colin licked the corner of his mouth, not knowing whether to be happy or sad. Did I really transmigrate to become a vampire? Colin muttered softly. Then he put down the glass, took out a scroll of parchment and spread it on the table. Using a language that did not belong to this world, he wrote frowny face, "Normal food will not produce any taste, nor will it cause a feeling of fullness. Drinking deer blood will bring a significant sense of satisfaction and can restore stamina. Other blood, to be tested." Putting down the quill, Colin sighed. What he wished the most now was to have a newbie's guide to transmigration or a vampire's survival manual for him to refer to, so that he did not have to guess blindly. Even if there was no such thing, at least he wanted to transmigrate to an existing species in this world, so that Colin could clearly know what he was, what leveling up path there was, and even find a master or something. But unfortunately, in this alternate world that was similar to the Western Middle Ages, there were no records of vampires. This world had elves, orcs, trolls, nagas, and the extinct giant dragons that once ruled the world. But there were no vampires. Colin felt that he might have become the first vampire in this world. This made him a little worried. This was because in his original world, vampires were creatures that only existed in fantasy. How strong they were, what weaknesses they had, were all imagined. And the settings in different works were not exactly the same. So, in order to fully understand his new body and new role, Colin could only experiment on himself. So far, he found that he was very similar to the legendary vampires. Photophobia, bloodthirsty, undying. Yes, undying. Because when he transmigrated this morning, he found that there was a dagger in his chest. Chapter 2. In the dark and empty dining room, Colin carefully unbuttoned his shirt and used the candlelight to examine the wound on his chest. The wound had not healed and was not treated in any way. But there was no blood flowing out. Because he could now control the blood in his body. Perhaps this was one of the vampire's innate abilities. Colin pressed on both sides of the wound and gently pulled on both sides. Hiss, a tearing pain made him suck in a breath of cold air. But Colin was somewhat happy. At least, it meant that his nervous system was still functioning well. This made Colin feel that he was not much different from a normal person. The wound was pulled open into a small hole. Through the hole, Colin could clearly see his heart. It was no longer beating. Well, this was a little different from a normal person. Colin was a little sad. With a sigh, Colin released his hands and let the wound slowly heal under the pull of his muscles. Since it would not bleed, there was no need to bandage it. He just needed to observe how long it would take to heal, if it could still heal. To be honest, when Colin woke up this morning and found the dagger in his chest, he panicked for a while. At that time, he felt that he was probably the biggest failure of a transmigrator in history, dying as soon as he arrived. But then he found out that he could not die. His heart was pierced, but he still could not die. As for who was the one who stabbed him in the heart, Colin had no clue at the moment. In this transmigration, Colin succeeded in inheriting the memories of his predecessor. From these memories, he did not find out who wanted to kill him. However, Colin already had some ideas on how to lure out the killer hidden in the dark. But there was no hurry. Now, he was more interested in the new body that he had inherited, which was suspected to be that of a vampire. After buttoning his shirt, Colin turned his gaze to the last food on the long table, garlic. It was said that vampires were afraid of garlic. In the previous world, Colin did not know much about the vampires that filled novels and movies. Moreover, he did not know what settings the vampires in this world followed. He had no choice but to experiment slowly. Colin cut off a piece of garlic the size of an ant and carefully put it into his mouth. Ugh! Colin simply vomited all over the floor. It seems that the vampires of this world are also afraid of garlic. Young Master Colin, are you all right? The maid guarding outside the door heard the commotion and hurriedly came in to check. I'm fine. Blurg. Young Master, I'm afraid you're sick. I'll go look for Pastor Mig. No. Hearing the words priest, Colin was so shocked that he almost jumped up. He quickly stopped her. I'm fine, really? But your face is really pale today, and you even vomited? I said no need. Colin rubbed his stomach, suppressing the urge to vomit as he glared fiercely at the maid at the door. The maid seemed to be frightened by Colin's stern eyes. She didn't dare to insist anymore. She could only say, "Then please take care of yourself," and left in a hurry. Phew! Colin breathed a sigh of relief as he leaned back on the chair and panted. Vampires looking for a priest? That's crazy! Although the priests of this world may not be able to restrain vampires, Colin didn't dare to test it with his life. At least not now. Maybe in the future, when he is fully prepared, he will test the churches of this world. But not now. After a while, Colin finally calmed down. He picked up the quill and continued to write on the parchment, frowny face disgusted with garlic. Eating it will cause vomiting. Carefully feeling the changes in his body, Colin added on the parchment, frowny face, but it's not fatal. Staring at the words on the parchment, Colin frowned again. That's not right. Colin looked at the clove of garlic in front of him and suddenly realized that he had only eaten a very small piece. Measurement problem. Eating a small amount may not be fatal, but if he ate too much? Colin looked at the whole garlic in front of him and his face turned green. He didn't want to try it again. Forget it, I'll just stay away from garlic in the future. After hesitating for a while, Colin decided to stop this dangerous experiment. Rolling up the parchment, Colin got up and left the dining hall. The maid standing guard outside the hall saw Colin and quickly bowed. Tidy up. Colin glanced at the maid who didn't dare to look at him. Don't tell anyone about this. Yes, young master. Walking through the dimly lit hallway, Colin returned to his bedroom. It was still early, so Colin sat down in front of the desk. On the desk, there was an open book, Chronicles of the Radiant Empire. Colin had read this book when he was young, but his memory was not clear. Now that he transmigrated, in order to better understand this world and find clues about the existence of vampires, Colin decided to do some research. But it was all in vain. There was no record of vampires in the book. Fortunately, Colin wasn't left empty-handed. He had reviewed the history of this human empire. More than 1,500 years ago, the legendary paladin serving the god of light, Garner Lorenzo, completed the unification of the human race and established the Radiant Empire, becoming the first emperor. In order to resist the enemies of the empire, Garner conferred the title of Duke to the 6 paladins under his command and ordered them to guard the 4 directions and constantly expand the territory. Thousands of years had passed, and only 4 of the original 6 dukes were left. The northern region where Colin was at was currently the territory of one of the 4 dukes, Duke Hilda. The northern frontier was originally the territory of the trolls, but they had been driven away by the Hilda family to the Sky Ice Field, which was further north. The trolls who were unwilling to lose wanted to regain this rich land, so they launched an expedition to the south almost every year. This year was no exception. And Colin's father, Baron Angeli, was currently at the front line of this war. As the night deepened, the candlesticks on the desk were extinguished, and the bedroom was quiet. Only the sound of Colin's steady and light breathing could be heard, as well as the hooting of an owl from far away in the kingdom of Greycastle. When the dark clouds covered the moonlight, a black shadow suddenly appeared at Colin's bedside. He looked at Colin, who was sleeping soundly, and a trace of doubt flashed across his face. Because he clearly remembered that last night, he had clearly stabbed a dagger into Colin's chest. Why is he not dead? The black shadow was very confused. But he did not hesitate. He quietly pulled out the dagger and slowly placed it on top of Colin's chest. At this time, he suddenly remembered that someone once told him, although most people's hearts leaned to the left, there were a few people who leaned to the right. Thus, this time, he quietly moved the dagger in his hand to the right a certain distance. Chi! The dagger fiercely pierced into Colin's chest. The immense pain woke Colin from his dream. He was about to open his mouth and scream, but a pair of big hands tightly covered his mouth. Woo! Woo! Colin opened his eyes wide in fear, staring at the assassin in front of him. He recognized him. After a while, Colin's struggle gradually subsided. But the black shadow did not let down his guard. He waited for a full 10 minutes before removing the hand covering Colin's mouth. Then he pulled out the dagger from Colin's chest and stabbed him in the throat. This time, you're going to die. Chapter 3. In this dangerous world, although humans occupied the most fertile land in the center of the continent, they also had to bear the covetous gazes of the surrounding foreign races. Therefore, when the Empire of Light was founded, they established a Lord's Law, clarifying the rights and obligations of the Lord. According to this law, a noble who lost his territory would be stripped of his title. Knight Carter was a victim of this law. His family's title was stripped precisely because his territory was invaded by the trolls. Thus, Carter also became a wandering knight. Without the support of his territory, this knight's life was very miserable. He could not even take out the money to maintain his armor and weapons. Fortunately, Baron Angeli took him in. Carter also offered his loyalty to the Angeli family. But obviously, this loyalty did not stand up to the test. Because just now, Knight Carter had personally stabbed a dagger into the chest of Baron Angeli's son. He had even stabbed him twice. Carter looked at Colin's corpse, guilt flashing in his eyes, but soon he became determined again. Thinking of that person's promise to him, Carter felt that his dream of reviving his family was just around the corner. However, just as Carter stood up from the bed and was about to leave quietly, he suddenly stopped in his tracks. Turning around abruptly, Carter only saw a cold light coming toward him. A sharp pain came from Carter's chest, causing him to roar in a low voice uncontrollably. But the physical pain completely could not cover the fear in his heart, that Colin, who was supposed to be dead, was actually alive again. Was he a devil? In his anger and fear, Carter subconsciously picked up the dagger in his hand that he had not put away and stabbed forward. A muffled groan came from the other side, followed by Colin's laughter. It hurts, doesn't it? You bastard, you stabbed me twice. Oh no, it's 3 times. Carter only felt that the strength in his body was rapidly draining away, and his consciousness was starting to blur. Speak. Who sent you? But before Colin could ask anything, Carter's body gradually went limp, and blood flowed out from his mouth uncontrollably. Colin moved closer and heard the man's dying voice. Monster, he died just like that? He was too weak to take a stab. Colin looked at Carter, who had completely lost all signs of life, and suddenly felt a little regretful. He should have avoided the opponent's vitals. Now their only clue had been cut off. Looking at the bloody corpse in front of him, Colin panted slightly, but he did not panic. First of all, he was just defending himself, so he didn't have any psychological burden. Secondly, this was not the first time he had killed someone. Of course, the cheech here referred to the previous owner of the body that Colin was currently occupying. In his previous life, Colin was a law-abiding citizen. Not to mention killing people, he had never been in a fight. However, the owner of this body had been on the battlefield. In his memory, there were many scenes that were 100 times more bloody and horrifying than what was in front of him. Therefore, after the memories were fused, this was just a small scene for Colin. The candle on the desk was lit. Colin spread out the parchment again and wrote frowny face attacks on the heart and throat are no longer fatal. Thinking of the legend that vampires seem to be afraid of silver weapons, he added frowny face normal weapons only. Silver weapons to be tested? At this point, Colin was a little worried. How was he going to test it? He could not possibly stab himself with a silver weapon, right? What if he really died from the stab? However, Colin immediately realized, who in their right mind would use a metal like silver to make weapons? Therefore, unless he deliberately exposed this weakness of his, no one would specially make a silver weapon to deal with him. Therefore, he did not dwell on this point. Putting down the quill, Colin picked up the wine glass on the table and went back to Knight Carter's corpse. Poof! The dagger in the corpse's chest was pulled out, and fresh blood flowed out. Colin's expression was calm as he placed the wine glass under the wound. The flickering candlelight shone on Colin's pale face. Coupled with the smell of blood in the air, it was especially eerie and terrifying in the dark night. Gulp, gulp, he tasted it lightly. It was very sweet. Colin smacked his lips, somewhat unsatisfied. Then he closed his eyes and carefully felt the changes in his body. It seemed to be no different from the reaction after drinking deer blood. Apart from the slight signs of heat in his body. Colin thought that this was the aftereffect of the intense fight just now, so he did not pay much attention to it. I'll drink animal blood in the future. Colin still had some psychological barriers to drinking human blood. Since there were no additional benefits, there was no need for him to make himself uncomfortable. Putting down the blood-stained wine glass, Colin looked at the corpse in front of him and began to worry. Although he had already gotten rid of the murderer who tried to assassinate him, Colin also knew that Knight Carter was just a pawn. The real person who wanted his life was definitely someone else. The reason was simple. If Carter killed him, other than being chased to the ends of the earth by the Angeli family, he would not gain any benefits. Moreover, there was no personal grudge between him and Carter. Therefore, someone must have paid a large sum of money to buy Carter to assassinate him. Who could this person be? Colin searched his memory, but did not find any suspicious person. There was no other way, there were too few clues. This feeling of the enemy in the dark and him in the light made Colin feel very uncomfortable. Moreover, since this person could buy Carter, he could probably buy others. Was the butler Eamon involved in this matter? What about the others? Thinking of this, Colin suddenly felt that the current Grey Castle was very dangerous. Especially when Baron Angeli was out on an expedition. He didn't want to deal with rounds and rounds of assassinations. After all, he wasn't sure if he was truly unkillable. Although his current body didn't seem to have any fatal spots, if someone were to chop off his head, he doubted that he would be able to grow a new head. Moreover, even if he did not die, if this secret was leaked, he was afraid that he would be in a very bad situation. Therefore, looking at the row of swaying candles on the desk, Colin gradually made up his mind. The 2 or 3 hours before sunrise was the best time to sleep. Even the guards on duty couldn't help but doze off at this moment. However, they were soon awakened by a scream. Fire! Fire! The dark Grey Castle suddenly became lively. The servants and guards rushed to Colin's bedroom with buckets of water, trying to put out the raging fire. At the same time, Colin quietly jumped out of the window on the other side of the Grey Castle, rolled on the ground, and then hurriedly ran away under the cover of the night. Suddenly, Colin stopped, his right hand holding the hilt of the sword at his waist. With a rustling sound, a kitten came out of the bushes in front of Colin. Meow! The kitten seemed to recognize the stupid human that it had just defeated during the day, and suddenly became arrogant. Colin sighed in relief, grabbed the kitten by the back of its neck and pulled it in front of him, smiled and said, "Oh, since you found out, then you can come with me." Meow. Well, you can be a mobile blood bag. Meow. Chapter 4. When the first rays of the morning sun shone on Grey Castle, the fire in Colin's bedroom had already been extinguished. Fortunately, most of the building materials in Grey Castle were non-flammable rocks, otherwise, the fire would not have only burned down this room. In the messy room, Eamon stood with his hands behind his back, staring blankly at the charred corpse in front of him. Dong dong dong. With heavy footsteps, a tall figure appeared in the room. Aemon, I've already ordered people to seal off the castle. At the same time, all the entrances and exits of Grey Castle Town have been strengthened. Humph, I don't believe that the murderer can escape this time. The person who came was at least 3 meters tall, as strong as a black bear. His whole body was wrapped in heavy armor, but he did not wear a helmet, revealing a big round bald head. Coupled with his fierce face, fierce expression, and the huge blood-stained axe in his hand, it was enough to scare all the children in Grey Castle Town to tears. Thank you for your hard work, Knight of Rigo. Aemon did not look back, his eyes still fixed on the charred corpse, but his focus was somewhat unfocused, as if he was thinking about something. Seeing this, Leg thought that the old butler was sad for the young master's death, so he sighed and said, "Sigh, let's tidy up the young master's body and wait for the old master to come back before burying him." Aemon did not respond. Leg touched his big bald head, thinking that the old butler was blaming himself, so he took a few steps closer to Aemon and whispered, "Aemon, I didn't see Knight Carter today, I suspect." Hearing Carter's name, Aemon's unfocused eyes instantly focused, then he turned to the servants who were still cleaning up the mess in the room and said, "Don't clean up here, you can leave." After the servants left, Aemon slightly raised his head to look at the tall Leg and asked, "I remember, 3 years ago, you and Carter had a competition in the Knights tournament organized by Earl Amon." Leg was somewhat puzzled. He did not understand why Aemon suddenly mentioned the previous Knights tournament, but he still replied, "Was that 3 years ago?" "It seems so." I beat him up badly that time." Aemon smiled. "Yes, he was stabbed off his horse by your spear, broke his arm, and lost 2 teeth. At the mention of his glorious achievements, Leg suddenly felt a little embarrassed, but at the same time, he was also very puzzled. "Why are you talking about this now?" Aemon did not answer. Instead, he continued to ask, "Do you still remember the 2 teeth that Carter lost? Were they on the left or the right?" "How would I know?" Leg was a little anxious. Aemon's reaction made him very confused and dissatisfied. Aemon didn't care about Leg's attitude. Instead, he revealed a mysterious smile and pointed at the charred corpse on the ground. "If you can't remember clearly, you can go take a look for yourself now." Leg frowned and stared at Aemon with his bell-sized eyes for a long time. Seeing that Aemon didn't seem to be joking, he finally squatted down and reached out to pry open the corpse's mouth. Crack! The corner of Aemon's mouth twitched as he watched the clumsy Leg pull off the corpse's chin. Leg was also shocked, and then he hurriedly tried to put his jaw back in place. "All right, stop messing around. Take a closer look at his teeth." Aemon was speechless at the clumsy Leg. There are indeed 2 gaps in his lower left gums. Leg turned his head back with shining eyes and asked anxiously, "Did Carter lose his left tooth back then?" Obviously, this boorish man also realized that there was something wrong with this corpse. Unfortunately, Aemon shook his head. "I also don't know which 2 teeth Carter lost back then." Leg frowned. Just as he was about to speak, he heard Aemon say slowly, "However, I know that young Master Colin has never lost his teeth." "That's right." Leg stood up abruptly and shouted excitedly. But then, he seemed to realize that his voice was too loud and hurriedly lowered it. "So, this corpse isn't young Master Colin at all, but that bastard Carter." "No." Aemon smiled and shook his head. "Young Master has already been killed by Carter. You have to bring people to capture this evil traitor now." "What?" Leg's eyes widened again. "Are you stupid?" Aemon sighed and explained patiently, "Think about it. Why did young Master set this fire? And why did he leave without saying goodbye?" Leg touched his big, round, bald head and seemed to understand. "You're saying that young Master deliberately burned this corpse to make others think that he's already dead?" "Yes." "Why did young Master do this? Maybe he wanted to see who was behind Carter? What was his goal? Or maybe he wanted to hide himself? Anyway, since young Master has his own plans, then what we can do is to cooperate with him and continue with this plan." "All right, I understand." Leg walked out with his head lowered. "I'll give the order to capture that bastard Carter now." Aemon watched Leg's tall figure disappear outside the door and silently added in his heart, Or maybe young master doesn't dare to trust us anymore. Why wouldn't I trust you? Colin smiled and said to the old mercenary in front of him, "What I mean is, I'll pay you half of the commission first, and the other half will be given to you after you introduce me to a caravan going to Fallen Eagle City. Then what if after I introduce you to a caravan, you refuse to pay the rest?" The old mercenary was obviously not satisfied with this method of paying a deposit first and then the final payment. "Do you think I'm someone who lacks money?" Colin took out a gold coin and tossed it up and down in his hand. The old mercenary's eyes instantly widened, and his gaze followed the gold coin up and down. It couldn't be helped. For people at the bottom of society like him, copper coins were the most commonly used currency. Silver coins were rare, and as for gold coins, they were something that only nobles and big merchants would have. "Then I want 30 copper coins." The old mercenary realized that the person in front of him was a fat sheep and immediately began to raise the price. 20. "Any more and I'll find someone else." "Deal." The old mercenary happily caught the 10 copper coins that Colin threw at him and began to lead the way. A moment later, the two of them arrived at the western part of Greycastle town and walked into an old tavern. Bearded Tavern. After entering, Colin discovered that the name of the tavern was indeed true to its name. At a glance, the people drinking inside were all bearded men. The old mercenary was obviously very familiar with this place. He greeted the crowd while leading Colin inside. The two of them arrived at a long table in the corner of the tavern. The old mercenary bent over and whispered into the ear of a bearded man sitting at the head of the table. The bearded man followed the direction of the old mercenary's finger and sized up Colin. He then waved his hand, indicating for Colin to come over. "This is the leader of the Firefox mercenaries, Sir Saru. Sir Saru is a second-rank warrior, and he's also heading to Fallen Eagle City. You'll definitely be safe if you follow their team." The old mercenary first introduced the bearded man to Colin. He then turned to the bearded man, his attitude clearly much more attentive. "Sir Saru, this is my nephew. Don't look at him because he doesn't look strong, his martial arts are quite good. He's your nephew?" Saru sneered, interrupting the old mercenary's words. The old mercenary was slightly stunned, a trace of panic flashing through his eyes. He then hurriedly explained, "Don't look at how he doesn't look like me. The main thing is that this kid looks like my brother-in-law. Moreover, I've been running around outside for so many years that my old face has long since changed. You should know that when I was young, I was also handsome and confident, with an extraordinary temperament." Saru sneered, interrupting the old mercenary again. "Your nephew is a knight?" Hearing the word knight, the old mercenary felt as if someone had suddenly grabbed him by the neck. His bragging words were immediately stuck in his throat. Colin's pupils instantly contracted. Chapter 5. The atmosphere in the Big Beard pub was still noisy and lively. However, the atmosphere in the corner where Saru and the others were at suddenly stagnated. "Night. The old mercenary opened his mouth wide and looked at Colin in shock. He knew that Colin's identity was not simple, but he did not expect him to be a knight. One should know that the knights in this world were fundamentally different from the warriors on the streets. Any well-developed commoner who could afford to eat meat, as long as they had a few silver coins, could learn how to activate battle energy in the warrior union and become a warrior apprentice. But knights were different. To become a knight apprentice, one must first have a certain level of talent, and more importantly, one must accept the baptism ceremony conducted by the priests of the Church of Light. The baptism ceremony in this world was completely different from the one on Earth that was only symbolic. The baptism ceremony in this world was performed by the priests of the Church of Light to communicate with the God of Light and engrave a sacred brand on the baptized person. This process was very taxing on the priests, so each priest could only conduct a limited number of baptisms in their lifetime. Therefore, these baptisms were very precious, and were basically monopolized by the nobles. It was almost impossible for commoners to come in contact with them. It was easy to imagine the scarcity of knights. For example, Baron Angeli only had 3 loyal knights under his command. Including himself and his son Colin, there were only 5 knights in the Baron's territory. Among them, Colin had not even entered the ranks and was only a knight apprentice. The professions in this world could be divided into 9 ranks, with rank 1 being the weakest and rank 9 being the strongest. Of course, there was still the apprentice rank below rank 1, which was set up for the rookies who had not officially entered the ranks. Knights and warriors of the same rank did not have a huge difference in battle strength. Knights did have a slight advantage, but in a direct confrontation, they might not be able to win against warriors. After all, they had to consider martial arts, willpower, weapons, equipment, and other factors. The real reason why the nobles flocked to the knight profession was because of its potential. The peak of the warrior profession was rank 6. That's right, looking at the whole continent, there had never been a rank 7 warrior, whether it was humans, trolls, beasts, elves. There had never been one. According to the first Pope of the Church of Light, His Holiness Peter Mersel, for mortals to enter the Holy Realm, they need the blessing of the gods. Above the 7th level was the saint level. Thus, knights of the 7th level were also known as holy knights. Therefore, according to this theory, warriors who had not been baptized would not be able to receive the blessings of the gods and would not be able to reach the 7th order. Currently, in this world, there were only 5 people who could break through to the 6th tier. And without exception, they were all professions that believed in a certain god. They were the human knights who served the god of light, the troll warriors who served the god of war, the elven rangers who served the goddess of fate, the Naga royal guards who served the god of storms, and the beastmen who served the god of destruction. Even those spellcasters who claimed that they did not believe in gods and only believed in the truth of arcane spells were unable to break through to the 6th level. However, they could release forbidden spells of the 7th step or even above. However, casting such a forbidden spell required the caster to pay a terrible price, so it couldn't be considered a conventional attack. Of course, it was not easy for knights to enter the Sage Realm. Once a clan gave birth to a holy knight, the entire clan would become extremely prominent. And all clans that had given birth to holy knights would receive the honor of having the word holy in front of their family name. For example, the master of the northern frontier of the Empire of Light, the Hilda family, was the descendant of the founding holy knight of the empire, so they were honored as the House of Saint Hilda. In the entire history of the Empire of Light, there were only 7 holy knight clans. The difficulty of entering the Sage Realm could be seen from this. As for the 8th order, it was called the Legendary Realm. The founding emperor of the Empire of Light, Garner Lorenzo, was a holy knight in the Legendary Realm, and the only one recorded in history. For more than 1,000 years after him, there had never been another holy knight who entered the Legendary Realm. Not to mention the 9th order. The 9th order was also called the Demigod Realm, and it was said that only the dragons who had once dominated this world could reach it. After their extinction, no race could give birth to another demigod. As for the realm above the 9th order, it was the realm of the gods. In short, knights were a noble and rare profession that could even be said to only belong to nobles. Obviously, they should appear in castles and not places like the Big Beard Tavern. Generally, knights would not choose to follow mercenary groups to another city. After all, they had their own squires, servants, and even an army. Therefore, Colin's appearance was particularly strange. Just as the atmosphere in the corner became more and more solemn, a small furry head suddenly popped out of Colin's shirt. Meow, as if it was very dissatisfied that its good sleep was disturbed, the kitten roared at Big Beard. Colin smiled slightly, stuffed the guy who woke up grumpily back into his clothes, and then asked Big Beard, "How did you know that I was a knight?" In fact, Colin felt that he had been careful enough. He did not equip any armor, and his sword was just a standard one-handed sword. His clothes were also the casual clothes of a guard who was about the same size as him. Moreover, according to the memory of his predecessor, although warriors and knights did have different battle performances, there should be no difference if they did not fight. Moreover, for Colin, who had not yet entered the knight apprentice level, because he could not activate the holy light to assist in battle, even if he really fought, there would be no difference between him and a warrior apprentice. Was there really a way to distinguish between these two professions at a glance? Colin felt that this might be the blind spot of his predecessor's knowledge. But who knew? Saru smiled slyly. I guessed. I was fooled. Colin immediately realized that he was fooled by this seemingly reckless and honest big beard. Saru should only be suspicious, but Colin's subconscious reaction made him confirm his identity as a knight. The main reason was that Saru's appearance was too confusing. Colin did not have much vigilance, and as a result, he was tricked into revealing his true profession. Firefox mercenaries. Hee, no wonder it was called that. He looked like a bear, but was actually as cunning as a fox. I have been in the mercenary world for more than 40 years, and I don't know how many people I have seen with my eyes. Hee, you brat, although you are dressed plainly, you don't look like a commoner at first glance. Sure enough, you were exposed when I tricked you. Colin took a deep breath, and kept reminding himself in his heart that he must be very careful when dealing with an experienced veteran like Saru. But on the surface, Colin appeared calm and composed, and was not nervous at all when his identity was exposed. He first took out 10 copper coins in front of Saru and threw it to the old mercenary, indicating that he could leave first. Then, he pulled out the chair beside Saru and sat down naturally. I admit that the little trick just now was not appropriate, and I apologize to you. But you wouldn't refuse a knight to travel with you, right? Your name? Saru stopped smiling and stared into Colin's eyes as he asked. Colin looked straight into Saru's eyes and replied with the most sincere tone, Sudwa. Chapter 6. Suduo? Saru stroked his large beard as a figure suddenly flashed through his mind. Viscount Suduo of Icestone City are? That's my father. Colin acknowledged his new father without batting an eyelid. Ever since he realized that the leader of the Firefox mercenaries in front of him wasn't easy to fool, Colin understood that if he were to lie again, he would have to be more skillful and not be as unreliable as the old mercenary he hired for 20 copper coins. Suduo was a real person. Of course, Colin wasn't familiar with this guy at all. He had only learned of this name from a recent letter from his sister Caitlin, as well as his recent encounters. The reason why Colin had chosen to impersonate this person was because of Khan's recent tragic encounters. It made it very reasonable for him to appear in a place like the Bearded Tavern as a knight. I heard that 3 months ago, Icestone City was breached by trolls? Saru naturally connected this to the news he had heard before. That's right. Colin nodded somewhat dejectedly. At the same time, his eyes were filled with unwillingness, hatred, anger, all sorts of emotions. The acting skills he displayed at this moment surprised even himself. Saru seemed to have been fooled as well as he sighed. I heard that your father would rather die than retreat and die with the city. He is indeed a knight worthy of respect. Thank you. Colin seemed to be holding back his tears as he asked with reddened eyes, You know my father? No. I've only admired Viscount Suduo for a long time. Colin let out a huge sigh of relief. One was a Viscount's, the other was a mercenary leader. These two people weren't even from the same world. If they could even know each other, then Colin felt that he was really unlucky. Then, Mr. Saru, can I follow your mercenary group to Fallen Eagle City? The reason why Colin wanted to go to Fallen Eagle City was because his sister Caitlin Angelo was there. In this current situation where danger lurked everywhere, he could only trust relatives who were related by blood. And because his father was still fighting on the front lines, Colin could only seek help from his biological sister. Of course, Saru finally believed Colin's fabricated identity. Furthermore, he even thought that he had guessed the reason Colin had gone to Fallen Eagle City. I remember that the wife of the Lord of Fallen Eagle City, Erlamon, is the elder sister of Viscount Suduo. So, you're going to seek refuge with your uncle, right? That's right. In fact, Colin had learned from his sister's letter that the real Khan Suduo had already arrived at Fallen Eagle City and became a knight under Erlamon. He was currently discussing with the Earl how to reclaim the Suduo family's fief. However, it was clear that Saru did not know about this. He no longer doubted Colin's fabricated identity. A downtrodden knight who had lost his fief and his family had been destroyed. With nowhere else to go, he wanted to head to Fallen Eagle City to seek help from his uncle. That made sense. Tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, the caravan that hired us will gather in front of the Bearded Tavern. All right, I'll be there on time. Then now, respected Knight of Khan, let me treat you to a cup of ale. My pleasure. The second day. The weather was gloomy, and the gray fog made the roads in the wilderness even more difficult to traverse and even more dangerous. This was the reason why Colin had to find a caravan to travel with. Otherwise, with his abilities as a knight apprentice, he would have been killed by bandits or wild beasts in the wilderness if he were to travel alone. Perhaps it was because of the large number of people in the caravan, or because of the reputation of the Firefox mercenaries, but in any case, there were no accidents on the first day. At night, the experienced Saru found a place with a small hill and not far from a water source to set up camp. Colin built a fire and boiled some water. Then, he soaked the hard bread until it was soft and stuffed it into his stomach. Since he could not taste it now, it did not matter if the food was good or bad. The kitten had long disappeared. It probably went to hunt for food by itself. Sure enough, not long after, he saw it return with a mouse in its mouth. At this time, Colin had already taken out the sheepskin scroll that he carried with him and added a sentence on it: frowny face human blood can help you advance. Yes, Colin discovered that he had advanced from a knight apprentice to a first-rank knight. It must be known that from an apprentice to an official knight, Colin had been stuck at this hurdle for 3 whole years. And the reason for his sudden advancement, Colin now suspected that it was because of the assassin's blood he drank the night before. After drinking the blood that night, Colin noticed that his body had started to heat up, but because of the urgent situation at that time, he did not pay too much attention to it. For the next 2 days, the fever persisted and only stopped at noon today. Then, he discovered that he had advanced. Because drinking deer blood did not cause such a fever, Colin guessed that it was because of the human blood. Of course, he had another guess. Assassin Carter, who was killed by Colin, was a first-rank knight. Therefore, perhaps only the blood of a professional could help him advance. In short, this guess needed to be further verified. Is this the Elven language? Colin turned his head and saw a fat middle-aged man standing behind him, staring at the words on the sheepskin scroll and guessing. Colin put away the sheepskin scroll and said casually. He recognized that the fat man was the owner of the merchant group, Oliver. I did not expect the Knight of Khan to be so knowledgeable, even proficient in the Elven language. Oliver immediately flattered, and then sat down beside Colin. I know a little. Colin frowned slightly. He did not have a good impression of merchants like Oliver. From his point of view, these merchants who pursued profits were too purposeful. Now that they took the initiative to curry favor with him, they must have some ulterior motive. Is this your pet? Oliver looked at the kitten that was fighting with the dead mouse and tried to find something to talk about. Yes. You are really interesting. Oliver smiled like a chrysanthemum. Does it have a name? Colin was stunned, as if he did not think that there was a need to name this mobile blood bag, but then he said on the spot, it's called Whitey. Whitey? Oliver looked at the pure blue short-haired cat beside the fire, and the smile on his face froze. Then he immediately returned to normal. What a good name. Mr. Oliver. Colin also smiled. You are really hypocritical. Thank you very much for your compliment. Oliver did not mind at all. The thickness of his skin was amazing. The two of them then chatted casually. After they became more familiar with each other, Oliver suddenly lowered his voice and said, That's right. Knight of Khan, if you want to take back the Sioux Duo family's fief, I might be able to provide you with some help. Colin, who was originally sleepy, suddenly became alert. He turned his head and looked at the fat merchant beside him with a faint smile. Do you know what you are saying? Chapter 7. According to the Radiant Empire's Lord's Law, nobles who lost their land would be stripped of their title. However, there was a way to regain their original title. That was to rely on their own strength to reclaim their land. Otherwise, even if the land was reclaimed, it would be rewarded to the new nobles who contributed to the reclamation, and not to the old lord. This kind of survival of the fittest rule also ensured the metabolism of the empire's noble system, preventing the emergence of nobles who only relied on their ancestors' protection to eat and wait for death. The real Khan Su duo chose to go to Fallen Eagle City to look for Count Oman after his family was destroyed, and not to look for the Su duo family's lord, the Duke of St. Hilda, because he had considered this point. If he went to the Duke of St. Hilda, even if the Duke sent troops to reclaim Ice Stone, he would not return it to the Su duo family. But it was different if he went to his uncle, Count Aman. Although Count Aman would not help Khan without asking for anything in return, he would definitely take into consideration his relationship with the Su duo family and take care of him. At the very least, Ice Stone would return to the Su duo family. And now, the real Khan still did not know how his discussion with his uncle went, but Colin's fake Knight of Khan already had a sponsor. Mr. Oliver, thank you very much for your kind intentions. However, building an army capable of attacking cities and recruiting a mercenary group to escort merchant caravans are not the same. The cost of the two are completely different. Of course I understand. Oliver chuckled, a strange light flashing in his eyes. My father was once a quartermaster, but because of some mistakes he made, he was removed from his position. However, I have some understanding of the cost of building a real army. Colin finally looked at the fat merchant beside him. If it was said that Oliver was a crazy speculator who did not know the immensity of heaven and earth in Colin's heart before, then now he had turned into an extremely daring crazy speculator. Although he knew that he was an imposter, Colin was still interested, wanting to probe the background of this ordinary-looking merchant. Then, how many gold coins can Mr. Oliver sponsor? Hee, well, of course I don't have that much money to build an army for you. Actually, it's our Chamber of Commerce that is interested in sponsoring you. Chamber of Commerce? Yes. Please allow me to reintroduce myself. I am one of the stewards of the Tulip Chamber of Commerce. If you, Knight of Khan, are willing to accept the sponsorship of the Chamber of Commerce, I can submit an application to the President. After that, the Chamber of Commerce will consider your strength and the cost of reclaiming Ice Stone City to determine the scale of the sponsorship. Of course, there is also the return after the matter is completed. Tulip Chamber of Commerce? Colin suddenly felt that the name of the Chamber of Commerce sounded familiar. After searching his memory for a while, he asked, "The Ice Lake town from 2 years ago?" "That's right." Oliver straightened his chest and nodded proudly. 2 years ago, Baron Billy received the sponsorship of the Tulip Chamber of Commerce to reorganize his army and recapture Ice Lake Town. The status of merchants in this world was not high. After all, no amount of money could buy a noble title. However, it was clear that there were already some astute and bold merchants who were trying to use the gold coins in their hands to expand their influence. The Tulip Chamber of Commerce seemed to be one of the best. Then, what kind of return did Baron Billy give your Chamber of Commerce? My apologies, Knight of Khan, this is a trade secret. Please forgive me for not being able to reveal it to you. All right. Colin rubbed his chin and changed the way he asked, "Then, what do you want from me?" Hee, as for the specific conditions, we can discuss them in detail when you see our president, Oliver replied without missing a single detail. I need to think about it. Of course. Once you have thought about it, you can come find me at any time. Oliver narrowed his small eyes and added with a smile, however, I can assure you that whether it is the Duke of St. Hilda or Count Amon, they will not be able to provide you with more favorable conditions than the Tulip Chamber of Commerce. But the help you provide will definitely not be able to compare to the Duke or the Count. Of course, but our appetites are also much smaller. Colin nodded, suddenly feeling that this Tulip Chamber of Commerce was very interesting. Although he was an imposter and did not need the other party's sponsorship, he still asked, "Does your Chamber of Commerce have a station in Fallen Eagle City?" Of course, it is next to the slave market in the western part of Fallen Eagle City. We will welcome your arrival at any time. Collins secretly made a note of this location in case he needed it in the future. Then, he changed the topic and started chatting with Oliver about everything under the sun. This Oliver had been doing business all year round and could be said to be experienced and knowledgeable. In addition, he was deliberately trying to curry favor with Colin. The two immediately chatted enthusiastically, as if they regretted not having met earlier. Unknowingly, the night gradually deepened and the camp gradually quieted down. Most of the mercenaries had already gone to sleep. Oliver tried his best to invite Colin to rest in his tent, but Colin slightly declined. Seeing that the other party's tent was indeed quite luxurious, he nodded and agreed. Just as everyone was sleeping soundly, Colin was suddenly awakened by a faint sound. He immediately stood up and listened attentively for a while. Then he suddenly shook Oliver awake. "Wake up, wake up. Someone is approaching our camp." Oliver was also quite alert and hurriedly got up. But after listening carefully for a while, he asked doubtfully, "Really? Why didn't I hear anything?" "Listen carefully again," Colin said confidently. He found that his hearing was greatly enhanced at night. Even a small movement a kilometer away could not escape his ears. "Enemy attack! Enemy attack!" Sure enough, the mercenaries in charge of the night watch also discovered the enemy and immediately shouted, "Calm down, don't panic. Light the torches, look for your companions, be on guard, and don't leave the camp." The Firefox mercenaries' Captain Sura's rough and loud voice immediately sounded, calming the chaotic camp. "I'll go out and take a look." Oliver was worried about the safety of his goods. After hesitating for a moment, he ran out of the tent. Colin followed him out and saw that the enemy who had rushed into the camp had already started fighting with the Firefox mercenaries. He did not join the battle. After all, Oliver did not pay him a commission. He did not need to risk his life for this fatty. But after watching for a while, Colin was relieved. The attackers should be a group of bandits. They were very weak and did not even have a warrior who was ranked. There were not many of them, only about 70 to 80 people. He did not know where they got the courage to attack the camp of the Firefox mercenaries, which had more than 100 people. After the initial panic, the Firefox mercenary group quickly regained their footing and forced the bandits to retreat. In less than half an hour, this group of bandits finally broke down and fled in panic after leaving behind more than 30 corpses. "Don't give chase, don't give chase!" Saru calmly shouted loudly, stopping those hot-headed fellows from chasing into the deep forest. After the bandits ran out of sight, Saru began to arrange for people to clean up the battlefield. Oliver also hurried to check on his goods and count the losses. Colin quietly walked to a remote and dark corner, squatting in front of a bandit's corpse and taking out a dagger and a water bottle. "Pff, gulp, gulp." Chapter 8. The morning sun dispelled the darkness in the forest and took away the worries that lingered in everyone's hearts. After the battle last night, everyone was busy cleaning up the battlefield, and at the same time, guarding against the enemy's return, so most of them did not continue to sleep. Now that the sun was out, everyone could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Some who were really tired and sleepy began to catch up on sleep. Some of the mercenaries began to prepare breakfast, while Captain Saru was still arguing with Merchant Oliver about the compensation for the casualties. In fact, both sides had already agreed on the standard of compensation before they set off. The reason why they were arguing now was entirely because of an unlucky person who was mistakenly killed by his own people. Oliver insisted that this person was the responsibility of the Firefox mercenaries and should not be paid for by him, so he quarreled with Saru. Colin did not care about the matter at this time. He was squatting by a fire, leisurely drinking water from a kettle. The rising sun was a little dazzling, so Colin lowered the brim of his hat a little, almost completely covering half of his face. Then, he took out the sheepskin scroll and crossed out the sentence he wrote yesterday. "Human blood can help with advancement." This was because he found that the blood that he secretly got from the corpse of a bandit last night had no effect on increasing his strength. Just like deer blood, other than satisfying his appetite and replenishing his energy, it did not have the same effect as Night Carter's blood. Perhaps the blood of ordinary people had no effect. Only the blood of professionals could help with advancement. Moreover, it probably needed the blood of professionals who were of a higher level than him to have an effect. Thinking of this, Colin unconsciously glanced at the only rank 2 warrior here, Captain Saru. Then he shook his head. Let's not talk about whether he could beat Saru. Even if he could, he did not want to kill an innocent person in order to advance quickly. Colin felt that he still had a bottom line. While his thoughts were running wild, Colin found that the argument between Oliver and Saru had finally ended. The chubby merchant was walking towards Colin, looking a little unhappy. It seemed that he had not gained the upper hand in the dispute just now. As they approached, Oliver glanced at Sarua's silhouette and complained to Colin, "What a troublesome fellow." Colin looked at the merchant who had proudly said that he would sponsor an army the day before. Now, he was haggling over every penny because of a mercenary's pension. He couldn't help but laugh. "Forget it, I'll just treat it as appeasing the people. After all, there's still a long way to go before we reach Fallen Eagle City. It's not a wise choice to fall out with the Firefox mercenaries now." "I know. If I hadn't considered this point, I wouldn't have given in to that old fellow Saru." Oliver obviously understood this point, but he was still unwilling to accept it and complained in a low voice. "Do you want to try the jerky I brought? It's much better than bread." Then, the fat merchant became generous again. Colin accepted Oliver's kindness with a smile and chatted with him casually. After everyone had finished their breakfast and rested for 2 hours, the merchant group packed up their tents and prepared to set off again. At this moment, Saru suddenly stopped everyone. He then laid down on the ground and pressed his right ear to the ground. Seeing this, Colin frowned slightly. His hearing in the day was far inferior to at night, so he couldn't hear any abnormal movements. On the other side, Saru suddenly jumped up from the ground and roared, "Horse! Puss! Quick! Everyone be on alert!" Following Sura's shout, the entire campsite was in chaos. Oliver's face instantly turned pale. He knew the severity of the situation. This was different from the attack last night. The bandit group couldn't afford to raise horses. If the people coming now were enemies and not friends, it would be very troublesome. As time passed, Colin finally heard the sound of hurried hooves. The ground began to tremble slightly, which made the mercenaries even more flustered. Even Big Beard Sarua's roar couldn't calm them down. Colin squinted his eyes and saw a gray line suddenly appear in the forest not far away. It was like a sharp arrow rushing towards the campsite. It was a group of cavalry. There weren't many of them, only about 20 of them. But looking at their overwhelming momentum, Colin had no doubt that the defensive position that the Firefox mercenaries had put together with all their might would immediately crumble if they charged at them. This was the terrifying pressure of the King of War in the era of cold weapons. Rumble. The ground rumbled. The cavalry was approaching. The mercenaries were trembling. Oliver closed his eyes in pain. Saru carried a huge half-shield and stood at the forefront of the defensive line like a boulder. Colin couldn't care less about the glaring sunlight. He sighed helplessly, took off his triangular hat, and pulled out the one-handed sword from his waist. Just as everyone was preparing to fight to the death, the charging cavalry suddenly stopped about 30 meters away from the campsite. Nay, a series of hoarse cries could be heard as 20 warhorses stood in the air. Good horsemanship! Colin couldn't help but praise in his heart. At the same time, his tense mood relaxed a little. They shouldn't be enemies anymore. But, seeing how they didn't slow down at all and came to a sudden stop, it was obvious that they wanted to show off their strength to the Firefox mercenaries. So, they might not have any good intentions. Oliver, the shrewd merchant, also noticed this point. He didn't take the initiative to step forward, but instead signaled for Saru to go forward and negotiate. Saru was helpless. After all, he had received a commission and was obligated to help Oliver solve any problems he encountered along the way. So, he could only put down his half-shield and sword and step forward empty-handed. At the same time, he shouted, "Friends on the other side. I am the captain of the Firefox mercenaries, Saru. I am escorting some goods from the Tulip Chamber of Commerce to Fallen Eagle City. Is there anything I can help you with?" The cavalry on the other side didn't react, as if they had suddenly turned into statues. The forest was silent. The wind seemed to have suddenly stopped, and the air was so heavy that it was suffocating. Saru suppressed the fear and uneasiness in his heart and braced himself to continue forward. After taking a few steps forward, he finally saw the insignia on the chest of the cavalry leader. He immediately gasped in shock. "Sir, are you a knight of the House of St. Hilda?" Sarua's loud voice also reached the rear. So, a small commotion broke out among the mercenaries. But at the same time, everyone couldn't help but lower their weapons to the ground. It was as if the name, Saint Hilda, had a terrifying magic that made people not dare to be enemies. On the Empire's northern frontier, the name, Saint Hilda, was a symbol of absolute authority. Even the Empire's royal family didn't have such terrifying appeal and influence here. Clang! The leader of the cavalry finally moved. He lifted the mask of his helmet, revealing a pair of cold eyes. He nodded at Saru, acknowledging his identity. Then he took out a scroll of parchment from the pouch in front of his saddle and threw it at Saru's feet. At the same time, he announced with an unquestionable tone, under the orders of the Duke of St. Hilda's son, Marquis Charles, you have been urgently recruited. Chapter 9. Marquis Charles? Marquis Charles is the eldest son of the Duke of St. Hilda, the first in line to the throne. Nonsense. Of course I know who Marquis Charles is, but why would his knight appear here? Why is he urgently recruiting us? Isn't Marquis Charles fighting the trolls at the border? Are we going to the border? How is that possible? This place is so far from the border. Even if there was an urgent recruitment, they wouldn't come here to recruit soldiers. And look, the order clearly says that we have to gather at Mirror Lake within 2 days. Where is Mirror Lake? It's not far from here. Follow this river and head north for about 50 kilometers. Then should we go? I don't want to go to the battlefield. But this is an urgent recruitment order from the House of St. Hilda. But it wasn't personally signed by the Duke. Won't Marquis Charles be the Dukes of the North in the future? That will have to wait until he inherits the title. Moreover, I don't want to die. You might not die. Perhaps this is a good opportunity to make a name for yourself. Ha, idiot! Who are you scolding? So what if I scold you? When Saru brought Marquis Charles's urgent recruitment order back to the camp, everyone immediately exploded. Some agreed, some objected, and they quarreled. The reason for this situation was that this urgent recruitment order came from Marquis Charles and not his father, the Duke of St. Hilda of the Northern Frontier. Marquis Charles St. Hilda's title was fake and did not have any actual land. It was only a confirmation of his first in line to the throne, similar to the position of crown prince in ancient China. Although the crown prince's status was noble, he was not the emperor. Therefore, if it was the Duke of St. Hilda who issued the urgent recruitment order, anyone who received the order from the northern frontier would not dare to resist. However, if it was Marquis Charles who issued the urgent recruitment order, looking at the noisy Firefox mercenaries, one could see its effectiveness. Enough. All of you, shut up. Saru roared in annoyance, stopping his men from quarreling. Then he turned to look at Oliver and asked, does Marquis Charles have the authority to issue an emergency draft? I remember that Marquis Charles shouldn't have such authority. Oliver was a little uncertain. He turned to Colin for help. Knight of Con, am I right? According to the law, Marquis Charles does not have such authority. Colin searched his memory. However, there is a similar precedent in the history of the northern frontier. Oliver's face, which had just turned for the better, turned gloomy again. He absolutely did not wish for the Firefox mercenaries to be urgently recruited at this time. Without the escort of the mercenaries, his caravan would be like lambs waiting to be slaughtered. It would be impossible for them to reach Fallen Eagle City safely. Then, Captain Saru, Oliver's tone was a little bitter. Are you prepared to accept this recruitment order? Saru's eyebrows were tightly knitted together. It was obvious that he was also very dissatisfied with this urgent recruitment order. After thinking for a while, he slowly shook his head and said, no. As soon as he finished speaking, Oliver's face was immediately filled with joy. However, the mercenary leaders behind Saru immediately exploded. Captain, you can't reject Marquis Charles's recruitment order like this. The House of St. Hilda won't let us go. And that cavalry, I think they really have the guts to kill. Saru suddenly turned his head and fiercely swept a glance at the noisy mercenaries behind him. The scene instantly quieted down. Do you know what we will face if we accept this recruitment order and go to Mirror Lake? Hearing Captain Saru's question, the mercenary leaders looked at each other and then replied, it should be to prepare for war. Although it's dangerous, it's still better than defying the orders of the House of St. Hilda. What? Saru sneered. We are going to die. What? Captain, why? Going to war doesn't necessarily mean that we are going to die. Moreover, if we win, we might be able to get some military merits. You are dreaming. Saru mercilessly interrupted his subordinate's delusions. Think about it carefully. Why would Marquis Charles's army appear at Mirror Lake? The mercenaries looked at each other. Colin's eyes flickered. He seemed to understand what Saru meant. Oliver immediately shouted, "That's right. I also suspect that Marquis Charles retreated all the way to Mirror Lake." What? How is this possible? How could Marquis Charles lose? The mercenaries all expressed their disbelief. It was no wonder that they had such blind faith in Marquis Charles. This was because in recent decades, the trolls had been completely suppressed by the Army of the North. 5 years ago, even the troll court was forced to move north under the threat of the northern frontier. A large area in the southern part of the Firmament Ice Plains had almost become a hunting ground for the Army of the North. If not for the harsh climate of the Ice Plains, which made it unsuitable for planting crops and building manors, the northern frontier's territory would have extended even further north. Under such circumstances, no arrogant person from the northern frontier would have thought that the House of St. Hilda would actually be defeated. But thinking about it carefully, Saru and Oliver's guesses made sense. In recent months, there had been no good news from the front lines. Instead, a few towns at the border had been breached one after another, and a few families had lost their lands. At first, everyone thought that the trolls were desperate and had sent small groups of troops to bypass the front lines and enter the northern frontier to harass them. Although the private armies of a few families had been temporarily repelled, as long as the main forces of the northern frontier led by Marquis Charles returned to reinforce them, they would definitely be able to wipe out the invading troll army and recover their lost lands. But now, it seemed that this might not be the case. This was because Marquis Charles's army had actually appeared at Mirror Lake. That was no longer the border, but the hinterland. In the memories of this generation of northern frontier people, the trolls had never had the ability to penetrate deep into this place. Most of the mercenaries fell silent, evidently afraid. But there were some who did not think so and encouraged, "Even so, we can still go to Mirror Lake and help Marquis Charles defeat the invading trolls." Idiot! Saru scolded sternly. "With the army retreating, you still want to turn the tide? Just based on us, mercenaries who were urgently recruited? It's not just us, the nearby mercenary groups must have received the urgent recruitment order. Just a bunch of cannon fodder." Saru knew very well what kind of people his subordinates were. These fellows could even kill their own people when fighting with thieves. Calling them a motley crew was a bit of a compliment. And they still wanted to go to the battlefield and fight with the regular army? They were really looking for death. Saru finally made up his mind. He ignored the voices of opposition from his subordinates and resolutely turned around, walking towards the cavalry of the House of St. Hilda. Looking at the back of Sarua's departing figure, everyone looked at each other with different expressions. Colin suddenly realized that his father, Baron Angeli, had not written back for a few months. This was obviously a bit unusual. It seemed like someone was deliberately blocking the news from the front lines. Could it be that the situation at the front lines was really bad? You dare to reject Marquis Charles's recruitment order? No one knew what Saru said, but the leading knight of the House of St. Hilda suddenly shouted angrily. "Sir Knight, I just want to know. Enough. Rejecting the urgent recruitment order is treason." The knight rudely interrupted Sura's explanation and said to the Firefox mercenaries gathered in front of him, "Whoever kills this traitor will immediately be promoted to centurion." While the mercenaries were suddenly in an uproar. Some were filled with righteous indignation, some sneered disdainfully, but there were also some whose eyes flickered. "Sir Knight." Saru did not even turn his head, confidently showing his back to the people behind him, and continued, "I respect the House of St. Hilda and Marquis Charles, but we also have the right to know the situation of the place we are about to go to." Sura's words stopped abruptly halfway through, because a long sword pierced through his chest. Saru spat out blood and tried hard to turn his head. After seeing the face of the young man behind him, his expression suddenly became extremely complicated. Bang! The corpse fell to the ground. Very good. The knight on horseback nodded in satisfaction and looked at the young man who was holding the long sword dripping with blood. Tell me your name. Respected knight, my name is Sar. Sar? What is your relationship with this Saru? He is my father, respected knight. Chapter 10. Are you willing to be mercenaries for the rest of your life? Don't tell me you're willing to live this kind of life where you lick blood from the edge of your blade and live in constant danger? Are you willing to fight only for money, and not for glory forever? Now, there is an opportunity in front of you. A chance to change your destiny. A chance for you to make a name for yourself. It's a chance for you to get rid of your commoner status and become nobles. You can even get your own land. Take your weapons and follow me, Marquis Charles, and the House of St. Hilda. Defeat the trolls. Looking at the group of mercenaries who were stirred up by Sar's speech, Colin suddenly smiled and said to Oliver beside him, "You don't say, this filial son is really a qualified speaker. I was almost incited by him. He's just a despicable guy." Oliver's expression was extremely ugly. He was at a loss for what to do. What should we do? Are we really going to Mirror Lake? Do we still have a choice? That kid even dared to kill his own father. But Oliver was unwilling to give up. However, he also knew that he had no other choice. Without the escort of the Firefox mercenaries, there was no way he could safely bring these goods to Fallen Eagle City. But if they really went to Mirror Lake, there was a high probability that these goods would be detained and used as military supplies. In this regard, there was no need to overestimate the conscience of the army, especially during wartime. Moreover, according to his guess, the Marquis army gathered at Mirror Lake was most likely a defeated army. If this was true, then going to Mirror Lake would be even more dangerous. Compared to the hesitant Oliver, Colin changed his mind and wanted to go to Mirror Lake. Baron Angeli had followed Marquis Charles to the war. If Marquis Charles's army was defeated and retreated to Mirror Lake, then Colin could find his father there. Since his father was right in front of him, there was no need for him to go to Fallen Eagle City to seek help from his elder sister. As for the danger of the battlefield, in any case, Colin could play dead. Moreover, there was probably no one who could act as well as he did. On the other side, Sar had completely taken control of the situation. He began to appoint the sub-leaders, and then told everyone to pack up and prepare to leave. The cavalrymen from the House of St. Hilda had long since left. They were probably searching for other unlucky bastards in the surrounding area. All that was left was a pile of horse dung and Sarah's lonely corpse. A corpse? Colin suddenly stepped forward. "Where are you going?" Oliver shouted from behind. He was extremely insecure at the moment. He felt that Colin was the only person in the entire camp who could make him feel at ease. "To bury Mr. Saru," Colin said without turning his head. Oliver's eyes widened. He couldn't understand why Colin wanted to collect Saru's corpse. "Are you that close to Saru? Was he not afraid of angering Sar?" After hesitating for a long time, Oliver did not follow. Thus, Colin walked alone to Saru's corpse and began to dig a hole. Ever since he advanced, Colin found that his strength had greatly increased. Moreover, he could already control the holy light energy to circulate in his body, thus speeding up the recovery of his physical strength and gaining a slight increase in strength. Using the opportunity of digging a hole, Colin could test and adapt to his new strength. Soon, a hole that was about a meter deep was dug. When Colin climbed out of the hole, he saw the expressionless Sar. "Let's carry him together?" Colin smiled and pointed at Saru's corpse. Sar stood still and said coldly, "Collecting the corpse of a traitor will damage your reputation, Knight of Khan." "Ha, it's okay. I'm a wandering knight who lost his fief. I don't have any reputation to begin with." Seeing that Sar was unwilling to help, Colin dragged Saru's corpse into the hole alone. At the same time, he muttered in his heart, "What does Colin Angeli have to do with Khan Su Duo's reputation?" Bang! The corpse fell into the hole, splashing up smoke and dust. "Knight of Khan, you should be going to the Mirror Lake camp with us, right?" Sar's voice came from outside the hole. Of course, this is my responsibility as a knight. Moreover, this is also the best opportunity to restore the Su Duo family's honor. Colin replied seriously. Very good. We will leave in half an hour. I look forward to continuing to travel with you. Okay, I'll be right there. Colin squatted in the hole and wiped his sweat. After the footsteps above gradually disappeared, he quietly took out his dagger and water bag. Gulp, gulp. When the Firefox mercenaries saw the military camp by the Mirror Lake from afar, the sky was completely dark. The sentinels patrolling the periphery had already discovered this group of people. After seeing the emergency conscription order in Sar's hand, they instructed them to gather at the location. Oliver followed the team forward, looking like he had nothing to live for. Colin drank the water in the water bag as he walked. He did not seem to be in a good mood either. This was because he found that the blood of the rank 2 warrior, Saru, could not help him increase his strength. The effect of drinking it was exactly the same as the deer blood and the thief who was nothing. It could only restore stamina. Colin felt that there were 2 possibilities for the effect of the blood. One possibility was that the previous advancement was just a coincidence, and it was not because of Knight Carter's blood. This was obviously the worst-case scenario, which meant that the blood did not have the effect of increasing his strength. There was another possibility. That was, not all the blood of high-grade professions had the same effect. Perhaps, only the blood of high-grade knights could help Colin increase his strength. Therefore, further experiments were needed. Thinking of this, Colin suddenly felt a headache coming on. After all, compared to the warriors on the streets, the number of knights was small, and most of them were of noble status. Their blood was not easy to get. After entering the military camp, Colin realized that the area was huge, and he could not see the end of it at a glance. The camp was crowded with people, and he did not know how many people had gathered. However, Colin could see that the people gathered in the camp were obviously not regular soldiers. They should be miscellaneous soldiers like the Firefox mercenaries who were temporarily recruited. Their weapons and equipment were not uniform, and some of them even held farming tools like hoes. It made people wonder if they were farmers who were urgently recruited directly from the fields. It seemed that the people gathered here were really a group of cannon fodder. After settling down in the camp, Oliver came over again. Knight of Khan, do you see the situation in the East Camp? That should be the regular army camp of the House of St. Hilda. The military camp by the Mirror Lake was divided into 2 large areas. Unlike the messy West Camp where Colin and the others were, the East Camp was obviously orderly and heavily guarded. That's right. I tried to take a few steps in that direction, but before I could get close, I was blocked by the patrolling soldiers. This was not surprising. The regular army camp would definitely not allow people to enter as they pleased. Colin looked at the eager Oliver and immediately understood what he meant. You want to go to the East Camp? Oliver nodded repeatedly. You have seen the situation here. Once a fight breaks out, we will definitely be cannon fodder. Therefore, we had better find a way to sneak into the camp of the regular army in the East. It will be safer there. However, I can't get in there. But you are different. As long as you say that you are from the Su Duo family, you will definitely be able to get in. Colin was a little hesitant, because he knew that he, the fake Khan Su Duo, could deceive the Firefox mercenaries and Oliver, but if he really went to meet the real nobles of this world, there was a high probability that he would be exposed. Of course, he could also go there with his real identity. This way, it would be easier to find his father, Baron Angeli, if he was also in this camp. But if Baron Angeli wasn't here, Knight of Khan, after you go there, please inform the Marquis that I am willing to contribute all the goods I have brought to the House of St. Hilda free of charge. Colin looked at the fat merchant in front of him in surprise. He admired the other party's decisiveness. You are really willing. What can I do if I am not willing? Oliver reluctantly squeezed out a bitter smile and then encouraged again. Of course, I will not forget the help you have given me. If I survive this time, I and the Tulip Chamber of Commerce will thank you greatly. Looking at Oliver's serious and enthusiastic eyes, Colin could only nod and say, Okay, I will try. After leaving the tent, Colin went all the way to the east. Just as he was still hesitating whether to reveal his true identity, a voice suddenly sounded. "Young Master Colin, is it really you?" Chapter 11. Master Colin, it's really you? Colin was shocked. He turned around and saw a group of patrolling cavalry gathering behind him. The leader quickly dismounted and took off his helmet, revealing a face that Colin was very familiar with. Raymond Morben. He was one of the two knights who were loyal to Baron Angeli. "Master Colin, why are you here?" Colin looked at Raymond, who was bowing to him. He did not know how to explain it to this knight, so he changed the topic. "Where is my father? Is he in the camp now?" Raymond's expression changed, and his eyes showed sadness. "Didn't you receive the letter I sent back?" "What letter? How long ago did you send it?" "About a month ago. The messenger crows should have arrived in Grey Castle long ago." "I didn't receive any letter." Colin frowned. His previous guess was right. Someone was blocking the news from the front line. How could this be? Raymond was also surprised. "What did you say in the letter?" Raymond lowered his head, and his voice became low and sad, but also full of guilt. "I'm sorry, Master Colin. At that time, I was writing to tell you that Lord Baron had unfortunately been killed in the battle more than a month ago." "What?" Colin was stunned. Although Colin did not have any feelings for this cheap father of his, he was still caught off guard by this sudden bad news. The protection that he expected was gone just like that. And it was gone forever. But, if this was the case, then the title of Baron of the Angeli family would fall to him? Title. Colin suddenly realized a problem. If he did not travel to this world, his predecessor should have been assassinated and killed. So, after Baron Angeli died in the battle, and Colin was assassinated, the title should fall to his sister, Caitlin Angeli. So, Colin suddenly realized that the person who benefited the most from this assassination was his sister Caitlin. Therefore, she was the most suspicious. Colin suddenly felt a chill run down his spine. Her own sister was actually plotting to kill her. Fortunately, he did not go to Fallen Eagle City. Otherwise, wouldn't he be walking right into a trap? In addition, Colin noticed another problem. That was, his sister must have found out about his father's death. Otherwise, she wouldn't have dared to make a move on Colin. After all, if Baron Angeli returned to the kingdom of Grey Castle alive and found out that his only son was dead, he would definitely not let it go. Even if Caitlin's hands were clean and the Baron could not find the murderer, he was still in the prime of his life. He could marry again and have children. Caitlin might not get the title. Under such circumstances, Caitlin would never take such a huge risk to harm her brother. Therefore, Caitlin must have found out about her father's death on the front lines through some means, and that was why she had such evil intentions. Just as Colin was letting his imagination run wild, Raymond unsheathed the long sword at his waist and knelt down in front of Colin with one knee, offering the long sword with both hands. "I didn't protect the Baron well and went against my promise. Young Master Colin, you have the right to judge me." Colin came back to his senses and looked at Raymond, who was kneeling in front of him. He suddenly asked, "Where is Knight Vala?" Raymond was obviously stunned. He obviously did not understand why Colin would suddenly ask this, but he still answered honestly, "Knight Vala was separated during the battle, I'm afraid, so you didn't see Vala's body." Vala Oman, the husband of Colin's sister Caitlin, the illegitimate son of the Lord of Fallen Eagle City, Earl Oman. At first, Baron Angeli was against the idea of marrying Angeli. Although Vala was the Earl's illegitimate son, his bloodline was not pure and his status was low. Baron Angeli was not the kind of person who would cling to the rich and powerful, so he was not willing to let his daughter marry an illegitimate son. But unexpectedly, Caitlin and Vala fell in love with each other and acted as if they were willing to do anything for love. It almost turned into a Romeo and Juliet story from another world. In the end, the Baron could not do anything about his daughter, and seeing that Vala was indeed outstanding and was already a level 2 knight at such a young age, he finally agreed to the marriage. This time, Vala was also on the front lines, and he actually went missing during the battle. This time, Colin was 90% sure that Vala was the one who sent the news to his sister. As for why his news was not blocked, It was probably because Earl Amon had played a part in it. Perhaps Earl Amon was the real mastermind of the assassination. After all, after Caitlin inherited the title, her child with Vala would be the next in line. This way, the Angeli family's Baron position would naturally flow into the Amon family. Earl Colin mulled over this influential name in the northern frontier, and a fierce look flashed in his eyes. Then, he took the long sword from Knight Raymond, who was half kneeling in front of him, and slowly swung it at his neck. Raymond closed his eyes and did not move. The long sword fell on Raymond's shoulder. But it did not move forward. Knight Raymond Mobin, are you willing to pledge your loyalty to me? Raymond suddenly raised his head and looked at Colin. His eyes were mixed with shock, guilt, and a trace of relief from surviving a disaster. Of course, Colin would not kill Raymond. Through the test just now, he had already confirmed Raymond's loyalty. A traitor would not expose his neck to his master's longsword. Colin admired Raymond's almost pedantic loyalty. Especially after experiencing Knight Carter's betrayal and witnessing the filial son Sar's act of killing his father for glory, an honest man like Knight Raymond was hard to come by. Bang! Raymond's left hand hit his chest fiercely, maintaining his half-kneeling position, and loudly swore, Raymond Mobin, today offer my unparalleled loyalty to the great roaring white bear, Baron Colin Angeli. For as long as I live, your will be my goal, and where your sword points, I will follow. I swear in the name of the Mobin family's ancestors, that I will always be loyal to you. The roaring white bear was the emblem of the Angeli family. As for the Baron position, strictly speaking, Colin had not yet obtained it. After all, he still needed to be recognized by the Duke of St. Hilda. However, as the first successor of the Angeli family, and with the death of the old Baron, it was not wrong for Raymond to address Colin as such. After all, as long as the Angeli family's territory was not lost, and Colin did not betray the country, then even the Duke of St. Hilda could not stop him from inheriting the Baron position. Get up. Colin smiled as he got Raymond to stand up and returned the sword to him. He then asked, what about you? Where is Marquis Charles's tent? I would like to pay him a visit and understand the current situation of this army, as well as their next move. Raymond's expression suddenly became awkward. Marquis Charles is not in the camps. What? Chapter 12. The Marquis is not here? Then where is he now? In the center of the camp on the east side of the Mirror Lake, in the largest and most luxurious tent, a man and a woman were talking. If Colin were here, he would immediately recognize the man kneeling on the ground as the Knight of the House of St. Hilda who had issued an emergency recruitment order to the Firefox mercenaries. That knight who had been so arrogant was now bowing and groveling in front of him. The Marquis. Faced with the woman's question, the knight was hesitant. Knight Bliss, if this question involves military orders, you don't have to say it. The woman did not make things difficult for the knight and said softly. This was a tall and slender woman, wearing a slightly loose snow-white fox fur coat. Her beautiful golden hair hung down from her shoulders and back. Her hair flashed with light as if it had some kind of magic, making people not dare to look closely, but they couldn't help but be captivated by it. A layer of translucent black veil covered her face, but the elegance and nobility that went deep into her bones could not be hidden. Her every move had an irresistible temperament. This kind of bossy temperament could only be possessed by real aristocrats. However, the mage hat on her head and the purple staff in her hand showed that she was a mage. This was somewhat strange, because in the human empires of this world, although nobles and mages could not be considered as mortal enemies, they were two kinds of creatures that did not fit in. The reason was simple: mages had no faith. In the eyes of these spellcasters, only the arcane truth was the eternal pursuit. The gods were just powerful mortals who had mastered the arcane truth. Therefore, in the eyes of the noble knights who believed in the god of light, mages were a group of complete blasphemers, heretics who should be burned at the stake. However, in the Empire of Light where the nobles held absolute power, mages were not too persecuted, although they were not welcomed. The reason was simple: mages were strong enough. Of course, mages who did not believe in gods were the same as warriors. The limit of their strength was the 6th grade, and there had never been a sanctuary-level mage. However, there were some differences between them and warriors. Even if mages could not enter the sanctuary level, they had a way to exert strength above the sanctuary level. This method was a forbidden spell. With sufficient preparation, expensive casting materials, and a frightening price, a Tier 6 mage could cast a forbidden spell. During the most intense period of the battle between the Radiance Church and the Mage Parliament, there were once 10 mages of the 6th step who joined hands to release the forbidden spell, Falling Stars. This terrifying forbidden spell had once erased a city with a population of over 1 million from the map. Of course, the mages had also paid a heavy price for this forbidden spell. 7 of the 10 level 6 mages died on the spot, and the remaining 3 died within 5 years. However, their sacrifice also made the church and the nobles deeply understand the terror of mages. In the end, both sides reached a certain level of reconciliation. However, the enmity left over from 1,000 years of conflict was not something that could be easily resolved. Coupled with the irreconcilable conflict in their beliefs, the nobles and the mages were basically 2 different forces. Therefore, the fact that the Knight of the House of St. Hilda treated her with such respect, and the fact that she was a female mage who seemed to be a great noble, was extremely strange. Seeing that the female mage did not continue to ask about the whereabouts of Marquis Charles, Knight Bliss heaved a sigh of relief. However, after hesitating for a moment, he reminded her, "Miss Vera, you'd better leave this camp as soon as possible. This place is not safe. There's no such thing as safety on the battlefield." The female mage looked at the knight strangely and said indifferently, "Since I'm here, I'm already prepared to fight." "No, you don't understand what I mean." Knight Bliss slightly emphasized his tone. "What I mean is that this place is very dangerous." The female mage's expression changed, and she stared at the knight who was half kneeling in front of her through the black veil. She asked, "Knight Bliss, what is the task that the Marquis gave you?" "My task is to patrol the west side of the camp and maintain order," Knight Raymond said to Colin. The 2 of them walked in the east side of the camp, which was much quieter than the messy west side of the camp. However, it was a little too quiet. Colin frowned as he looked at the situation in the camp, and the uneasiness in his heart became more and more serious. "Only patrol and maintain order? Didn't he ask you to stand guard around the perimeter?" "No." Raymond shook his head. It was obvious that he had the same doubts. "It's not just our team. I haven't seen any cavalry teams spread out to act as sentries." Colin's frown deepened. The importance of vision in war was self-evident. But now, this camp stationed by the Mirror Lake had directly given up on scouting the surrounding situation. This was simply a form of tactical suicide. Other than the possibility that Marquis Charles was an idiot commander, it could only mean that the importance of this camp was very low. Or this place was simply a bait. "I'm afraid the main forces of the army have long left the camp." Colin looked at the overly quiet east side of the camp and asked Raymond. "Yes, young master. There have been troops leaving the camp these days, but they have not returned. That's why the main forces of the regular army have already left quietly. Now, only those mercenaries and commoners who were summoned by the emergency conscription order are left here. Of course, there are also downtrodden knights like you who have lost their lord. Yes, our real task is actually to watch over those small fries and prevent them from running around." It seems like Colin was halfway through his sentence when he saw a group of cavalry coming out from the center of the camp. The one leading the group on a white horse was actually a woman. Moreover, Colin recognized the knight following closely behind her at a glance. It was the one who issued the emergency conscription order to the Firefox mercenaries. This was a big shot. Colin, who had already realized that he was in danger, immediately walked over. Since he could not find Marquis Charles, then, finding this big shot in front of him should be able to help him escape the fate of being cannon fodder. However, Colin had only taken a few steps when he was frightened by the ear-piercing sound of the bugle. Woo! Colin suddenly turned his head and saw a flock of birds in the forest in the north. Then, as the earth trembled, a thin black and white line appeared on the horizon. The trolls were here. Like a drop of water dripping into a boiling pot of oil, the entire Mirror Lake camp immediately boiled. Enemy attack! Enemy attack! Don't run around. Line up. Line up and face the enemy. The shouts of the officers had no effect at all. The motley crew that had gathered in the west side of the camp was suddenly startled and in complete chaos. This was the consequence of not having a sentry cavalry. When the enemy attacked, there was simply no time to react. In fact, even if there was enough time to react, it was impossible for the small fries in this camp, who had been urgently conscripted, to resist the trolls' regular army. Colin was very clear that what was about to happen would definitely be a one-sided massacre. Thus, he pointed at the woman who was hurriedly running east and said to Raymond, "Let's go. Let's follow her closely." Chapter 13. Kill. The enormous giant demon army was like a wave from hell. It carried a power that could crush everything as it swept toward the Mirror Lake camp. For a moment, it was as if the heavens were falling and the earth was splitting apart. The weak defensive line that the Mirror Lake camp had barely managed to organize collapsed under this attack. Plop! Plop! Under the assault of the troll army, the collapsed human army was squeezed into the icy lake. Only in the east and west were a few scattered human soldiers who saw that the situation was not good and managed to escape before the troll army closed in. Woo! The ground began to tremble amidst the wolf howls. 2 wolf cavalry units split off from the flanks of the troll army, one in the east and one in the west, chasing after the human deserters. Splash! A huge wave suddenly appeared on the calm surface of Mirror Lake, charging toward the troll demon wolf cavalry on the east side of the battlefield. "Stop advancing!" The leader of the wolf cavalry roared. However, the charging wolf cavalry could not control their momentum at all. The huge wave was like a terrifying hand smashing down. Bang! Hundreds of wolf cavalry were instantly swallowed. There was no trace of blood, nor were there any pieces of flesh or broken bones. The huge wave immediately froze when it came into contact with the ground, forming an ice wall more than 10 meters tall in front of the troll demon wolf cavalry. Within the ice wall, the troll demon wolf cavalry still maintained their charging posture when they were alive. It was lifelike. This terrifying turn of events caused the wolf cavalry behind to stop in their tracks. They hesitated in front of the ice wall, their faces filled with fear. Just as the human deserters were about to run further and further away, a bright red spear shot out from the center of the troll army, drawing a long trail of blood in the sky before finally piercing into the ice wall. Crack! A crack appeared on the ice wall. Then even more cracks extended from where the spear had pierced, covering the entire wall like a spiderweb. Bang! The ice wall shattered. Countless pieces of ice fell to the ground along with the remains of the wolf cavalry. Chase. Following the leader's order, the wolf cavalry unit regrouped and once again chased east. But this time, the wolf riders were no longer as arrogant as they were at the beginning. There's a magician among the human deserters? A troll general riding a white wolf picked up the blood-red spear that had fallen to the ground as he stepped on the shattered ice. It was obvious that he was the one who had broken the ice wall blocking their way. "Quake, you go after it too. This should be a big fish." Another troll riding a white wolf came over and said to the troll general who had picked up the spear. The mounts of the trolls were direwolves. These ferocious beasts were larger than normal warhorses and were generally gray in color. However, there were a few direwolf species that had white fur. Such a white wolf was sacred in the eyes of the trolls. It was the incarnation of the war god that they worshipped. Therefore, only the high-status trolls had the right to use a white wolf as a mount. Quaker bowed respectfully, then led a team of wolf riders to the east, whistling through the air. The ice wall spell here was only a small interlude. On the main battlefield, the human army that had been put together at the last minute had long been defeated. They were either kneeling and begging for mercy or being chased into the Mirror Lake by the trolls. Only a few people were still resisting with all their might, trying to fight their way out of the encirclement. In fact, there were quite a few remnants of the human army that had managed to escape. Because the trolls seemed to have some misgivings, they didn't put all their forces into the encirclement to intercept the scattered human army. Instead, they left more than half of their elite troops in the rear as a reserve, as if guarding against something. The slaughter was still ongoing. The flowing blood kept converging into the mirror lake, dyeing half of the lake's surface a dazzling red. The suffocating smell of blood attracted flocks of vultures. They anxiously circled above the battlefield, ready to swoop down and feast at any time. The sun gradually set in the west, and the flames of the setting sun began to burn on the horizon. However, the sounds of slaughter by the mirror lake showed no signs of stopping. At this time, a commotion suddenly came from the rear of the troll army. A troll messenger quickly rushed in front of Quaker and loudly reported, "General, a human army has been discovered at the rear. There are about 40 to 50,000 people." Quaker was not alarmed. Instead, he was overjoyed. He laughed loudly and said, "Good. That little lion finally dares to show his face. Ha, let's teach him a good lesson." The emblem of the House of St. Hilda, the master of the northern frontier, was a golden lion. The little lion that Quaker mentioned was obviously the son of the Duke of St. Hilda, Marquis Charles. This Marquis should have been the highest commander of the human side in this battle, overseeing the Mirror Lake camp and fighting the trolls to the death. However, he was clearly unwilling, or rather, did not dare to face the troll army head-on. Instead, he issued an emergency conscription order and recruited a group of troops and militia to fill the Mirror Lake camp as bait. He himself led the real army to launch a sneak attack from the rear while the trolls were attacking the Mirror Lake camp. Even though the entire plan was a little cruel, it was still a good one. If they could really catch the trolls off guard and cause them to be unable to take care of each other, they might be able to win the battle. Unfortunately, for some reason, this plan was clearly seen through by the troll army's commander in advance, and they had made preparations to deal with it. Thus, when Marquis Charles led his army to charge to the rear of the troll army, he did not have an irresistible force as he had expected. Instead, he met with an iron plate. A fierce battle thus began. It was late at night. A half-moon hung in the sky, its cold radiance scattering across the forest. A group of human cavalrymen were setting up camp in the forest, but they did not dare to start a fire to cook. They were worried that they would expose their target and attract their pursuers. It had been 3 days since the defeat at the Mirror Lake. After 3 days of fleeing, killing, and bloodshed, this team of more than 500 people was now left with a little over 100 people. It was indeed a miracle that they could last until now under the encirclement of the troll demon wolf cavalrymen. Of course, this was also because their battle strength was indeed strong. Furthermore, there was a spellcaster among them. In a head-on battle, a mage would be completely defeated by a knight or even a warrior of the same level. This was because no one would foolishly stand in place and wait for a mage to finish chanting without interrupting or dodging. However, on the battlefield, the role of a mage would far exceed that of a knight of the same level. The ice wall that blocked the wolf cavalrymen was a good example. It was a level 3 spell that ended the lives of hundreds of wolf cavalrymen in an instant. However, if a level 3 knight faced hundreds of wolf cavalrymen, even if there were no professionals among the wolf cavalrymen, he would still die of exhaustion under the siege of the enemy. At most, he would drag a few dozen of them down with him. The forest was quiet, with only the occasional neighing of horses and the faint howling of owls. In the camp, most of the people were eating hard bread in silence. Only a few leaders were gathered together, softly discussing how to get rid of the pursuers behind them. Meow! Whitey, don't run around. Colin chased after Whitey's figure and came to the center of the camp. Sorry, it's a little naughty. It's fine. The female mage grabbed the kitten that was trying to climb onto her body and held it in her arms to pet it. Seeing this, Colin also sat down and did not regard himself as an outsider. The female mage seemed to have noticed Colin's little scheme, so she did not chase him away. Instead, she asked, "Which family's knight are you?" Colin raised his head and looked at the female mage. The black veil covered half of her face, leaving only a pair of deep blue eyes that seemed to reflect everyone's deepest desires. "My name is Colin Angeli." Chapter 14. This time, Colin told them his real name. He knew that the people in front of him were not the same as the Firefox mercenaries. If he continued to use the fake identity of Konsudwa, the chances of him being exposed would be high. Moreover, he did not know who wanted to kill him before. Now, since he already knew who the murderer was, there was no need to hide anymore. There was only one thing he wanted to do: revenge. Anjali? The female mage frowned. She felt like she had heard this name before, but she could not remember where. Lord of Grey Castle Town, Baron Anjali, Roaring White Bear. Night Bliss reminded her. Yes, it is my father. Colin put his left hand on his chest and bowed, making a standard aristocratic salute. The female mage hesitated for a moment, then stood up and bent her knees. Her right hand pressed her lower abdomen, and her left hand lifted the skirt of her mage robe. Sure enough, Colin's heart skipped a beat. This female mage was really a noble. A mage among nobles. This is really interesting. Moreover, looking at the respectful attitude of Night Bliss, and the way he protected her all the way, this female mage probably had a close relationship with the House of St. Hilda. However, Colin did not have the intention to investigate her real identity. Now, the relationship between the nobles of the Empire and the Mage Parliament was cold, so this female mage who was born a noble was naturally an awkward existence. She had been hiding her face all this time because she did not want others to know her real identity. Colin came here with the help of Whitey, hoping to establish a relationship with the real owner of the northern frontier, the House of St. Hilda. This was the key to him being able to avenge his predecessor and completely get himself out of danger. I didn't expect Night Colin to be in the Mirror Lake camp. Bliss looked at Colin expressionlessly. His indifferent eyes had a trace of scrutiny. It's just a coincidence. Colin answered vaguely, then changed the topic and asked about the purpose of this trip. May I ask, what are we going to do next? Night Colin, do you have any suggestions? Bliss did not answer Colin's question. Although Colin's identity gave him the right to join the discussion, it did not mean that he would automatically gain the trust of Bliss and the others. Colin didn't mind Bliss's wariness. He picked up a tree branch and drew a simple map on the ground. If I remember correctly, the closest city to us is Fallen Eagle City. It's in the southeast direction, and it's about 4 to 5 days away. According to the direction we're heading, that should be our destination, right? Yes. Seeing that Colin was so familiar with the surrounding environment, Bliss did not deny it. Colin smiled faintly as the tree branch in his hand continued to draw circles around the Fallen Eagle City. Then do you think we can hold on until we reach Fallen Eagle City? Bliss stopped talking. However, Colin still caught a hint of uncertainty in his eyes, which were pretending to be firm. Along the way, the small cavalry team left behind by the House of St. Hilda in the Mirror Lake camp had suffered heavy casualties. However, the pursuers behind them seemed to be endless, and they were getting closer and closer. Obviously, Bliss was beginning to feel that the situation was not good. Night Colin, do you have any suggestions? This time, it was the female mage who asked. Colin smiled as he drew a big X on the Fallen Eagle City and said firmly, "We can't go to Fallen Eagle City. That's a dead end." The female mage frowned, seemingly unhappy with Colin's assertion. However, Night Bliss beside her asked, "Then, in your opinion, which direction should we go?" Seeing that Bliss did not deny his words, Colin immediately understood. Bliss must have noticed that a large net was quietly forming around them, waiting for them to fall into it. Since Fallen Eagle City was their most likely escape route, the trolls would definitely have set up many obstacles in that direction. Go north. Colin drew a huge arrow on the ground, pointing north. North? The female mage suddenly exclaimed, "Then aren't we going back again?" That's right, if they went north, they would be in the direction of the Mirror Lake camp. Bliss did not speak, staring blankly at the simple map on the ground. Colin raised his hand and gestured for the other party to calm down. He then explained, "If you also think that going north is an impossible choice, then it means that the trolls will not expect us to turn back." But isn't that walking right into a trap? There is indeed a large net around us, And it's getting tighter and tighter. Colin opened his right hand and clenched it tightly. However, the weakest part of this net is the north. If we want to break free, the best choice is to turn back and go north. Furthermore, Colin paused, Marquis Charles's real army should be in the north. Knight Bliss' eyes flashed, but he remained silent. The female mage did not have any qualms about this, nor was she surprised that Colin could guess Marquis Charles's intentions. Instead, she asked directly, "Do you think Marquis Charles has a chance of defeating the troll army?" Colin spread his hands and shook his head. He did not even know how many troops Marquis Charles had, how strong they were, or how well they could command on the spot. How could he guess the outcome of the battle? Whether Marquis Charles wins or loses, it doesn't have much to do with us. Because what we need to do now is to jump out of the encirclement that our pursuers are weaving. After we jump out, we can release the sentries and scout for information on the Mirror Lake battlefield. Then, we can make further plans. That way, we'll have a lot more room to maneuver. The female mage thought about it and felt that Colin's words made sense. However, she had focused on arcane research since she was young and had not received any military education. She could not make up her mind about Colin's bold suggestion, so she could only look at Knight Bliss for help. Bliss pursed his lips and thought for a while before finally nodding, "I agree." Colin immediately heaved a sigh of relief. Although turning around and heading north was indeed the best chance to break free of the encirclement, he did not say the real reason why he did not want to continue forward. Further ahead was Fallen Eagle City, and the biggest suspect for the murder of his predecessor, his sister Caitlin, was there. If it was only Caitlin's scheme, then Colin was actually not too afraid. However, if the Lord of Fallen Eagle City, Earl Amon, was also involved, then he would really be walking right into a trap if he went there now. Alright, then we'll turn around tomorrow and head north. Seeing that Bliss had agreed to Colin's plan, the female mage made up her mind. She then returned the kitten in her arms to Colin and asked, "Why do you call it Whitey?" Colin smiled as he took the pure blue short-haired cat. "Is the name Whitey not nice?" "No, it's a little unexpected." "Ah." Colin laughed and replied pointedly, "Is it a good thing to always let others guess what you're thinking?" The female mage laughed as well, her large eyes turning into crescent moons. "That makes sense." Chapter 15. Beside a small stream in the forest, a troll demon wolf rider was fetching water. Around him, 4 of his companions were on guard. Those who were experienced in surviving in the wild knew the importance of a water source, but it was also because of its importance that it became a natural trap. One of the wolf riders finished fetching water and signaled to his companions to take over. At this moment, he suddenly sensed an uneasy aura and immediately pulled out the curved sword at his waist. The other 4 wolf riders were also shocked by their companions' actions and immediately looked around nervously. But nothing happened. The forest was silent, and only the rustling of the trees could be heard. The wolf riders did not let down their guard, but instead became even more nervous. Because it was too quiet. Whoosh! 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 The sound of an arrow whistling through the air suddenly broke the suffocating silence. Then there were 2 screams. The remaining 3 troll demons did not even have time to check if their 2 companions were dead or alive. They quickly climbed onto their dire wolves and ran. Knight Bliss shouted and took the lead to rush out. Behind him, hundreds of human riders galloped out. The quiet morning was completely broken, and the bloody prelude to a massacre was played once again. Normally, dire wolves were better than warhorses when it came to sprinting over short distances, but their stamina was relatively weaker when it came to long-distance attacks. Therefore, after the 3 troll demon wolf riders charged out for a distance, not only did they not shake off the pursuers behind them, they were getting closer and closer. Furthermore, after they closed the distance, the arrows of the humans came flying again. Not long later, 2 more wolf riders were killed by the arrows. Seeing this, the last remaining wolf rider stabbed his blade into the direwolves but with bloodshot eyes. A whir! In pain, the direwolf instantly sped up and pulled some distance away from its pursuers. But the speed buff from self-harm did not last for long. The dire wolf that had lost too much blood was slowly losing its stamina. In the end, it was still caught by the human riders and fell to the ground after being shot by an arrow. The troll rolled a few times on the ground, then got up pathetically and wanted to continue running forward. Bliss urged his horse to catch up and cut off the troll's head with a single slash. Before he could catch his breath, there was a commotion in the forest in front of him, and then more troll demon wolf riders jumped out. He was still one step too slow. Bliss sighed inwardly. He knew that he hadn't dealt with the troll sentinels fast enough and had attracted even more enemies. Line up. After estimating the distance between them and the wolf riders, Bliss knew that he couldn't avoid this battle, so he ordered loudly, "Advance!" The human cavalrymen who had just run for a while took a breather. Under Bliss's orders, they pulled down their visors again and prepared to face the enemy. Speed up. Fortunately, there weren't too many wolf riders attacking them, so they could still fight. Charge. As the distance between them narrowed, both sides entered the sprinting stage at the same time. There was no retreat, no evasion, and no mercy. When enemies meet on a narrow path, the brave wins. Kill. Kill. Purring. With a loud crash, blood and broken bones splattered everywhere. It was bloody, savage, and tragic. Life became the sacrifice, and blood was the decoration. The tranquil forest instantly turned into a terrifying altar. After a fierce battle, the humans finally gained the upper hand. This group of cavalrymen from the House of St. Hilda was indeed elite. Furthermore, Colin's guess was right. The trolls didn't deploy a large number of troops in the direction of the north. Clearly, the trolls didn't expect that this group of human deserters would dare to return to the main battlefield. Chase? Seeing that the remaining dozen trolls wanted to escape, Bliss immediately gave the order to pursue. He couldn't let these fellows escape, or they would definitely attract more troops. At this moment, a blue light suddenly bloomed in the forest. It was as if the season had suddenly changed in the direction the trolls were retreating in. A layer of frost covered the ground and treetops at a speed visible to the naked eye. Then, it instantly enveloped the dire wolves, making it difficult for them to move. "It's magic!" The leader of the wolf riders cried out in pain, despair in his eyes. Yes, the female wizard hiding at the back had finally completed her incantation. A grade 3 spell, Frost Nova, was cast at the perfect moment, slowing down the speed of the wolf riders' escape. Kill them all? Bliss took the opportunity to lead his troops forward, beheading the trolls that seemed to have been slowed down. Colin rushed to the front of the leader of the wolf riders and chopped off his right hand that was holding the weapon, but didn't kill him with another strike. "I'll see if I can get any information out of him." Colin dragged the half-dead leader of the wolf riders and shouted at Bliss. "All right, but you better hurry, we can't stay here for too long." Bliss nodded and then loudly ordered his subordinates, "Hurry up, hurry up. I'll give you 10 minutes to clean up the battlefield." "Yes." "Young Master Colin, do you need help?" Raymond came over. "No need, I'll do it myself." Colin rejected Raymond's kind intentions and dragged the leader of the wolf riders behind a large tree. He asked, "Tell me, are there any other troll troops nearby?" "But..." The leader of the wolf riders spat out a mouthful of bloody spit and angrily rebuked, "I won't tell you even if I die." Colin tilted his head and nimbly dodged the spit. He then took out his dagger and cleanly slit the leader's throat. "All right, then go to hell." The leader of the wolf riders stared with round eyes, as if asking, "Why didn't you follow the rules?" When the leader had completely stopped breathing, Colin raised his head and looked around. Seeing that no one was paying attention to him, he quietly took out his water skin. Gulp, gulp, that's right, Colin's real goal wasn't to interrogate him. He had already noticed in the previous battle that this leader of the wolf riders was a warrior. Similar to human knights, warriors were a unique profession of the trolls. They served the god of war and thus had the potential to advance to the Holy Realm. After discovering that the blood of warriors had no special effects, Colin felt that he should try to see if the blood of a troll warrior was the same as that of a human knight and could help him increase his strength. Furthermore, the strength of this leader of the wolf riders should be between level 2 and level 3, and should be higher than Colin's current level. Thus, if the blood of a warrior really had an effect, he should soon find out. 10 minutes passed in the blink of an eye. Colin hid the water skin that was filled to the brim and returned to the group. The battlefield had been cleaned up. All the trolls and their mounts had been killed, and their corpses were strewn about the forest. The dead of the humans had been hastily buried. After this battle, there were less than 100 people left in this small group of escapees. Colin did a rough count and found that there were only 70 or 80 people left. With a sigh, Colin mounted his horse and prepared to set off. At this moment, Bliss led the female wizard's warhorse to Colin's side. "Knight Colin. Ma'am, what can I do for you?" The female wizard lowered her head slightly, as if avoiding Colin's gaze. There was a trace of shyness in her voice. "Excuse me, may I ride the same horse as you?" Chapter 16. Even through the black veil, Colin could still see that the female mage's face was flushed red. It was only then that he noticed that the female mage's blonde hair had turned white. Furthermore, there was a frosty aura around it. She was losing control of her arcane energy. No wonder she needed help. "Of course, it would be my pleasure." Since the female had asked for it, Colin would not be pretentious. He also understood that the reason why she chose him was not because she suddenly took a fancy to him, but because he was the nobleman with the highest status in the team. That's right, class discrimination. But in this world, it was so natural. Even if Knight Bliss was powerful and could kill Colin with one hand. But as long as he was not conferred a title or became the heir of a title, then in the eyes of the real nobleman he could only be considered as a reserve nobleman and had not stepped into the nobleman's threshold. There was a saying that could describe the awkward situation of the knight. In the eyes of the commoners, they were noblemen, but in the eyes of the nobleman, they were commoners. So, the female mage of noble birth would rather choose Colin than let Bliss, who she was more familiar with and trusted, get close to her. Of course, it could also be because Bliss needed to lead the team and could not be distracted. As Colin's thoughts ran wild, he got off the horse and rode on the female mage's warhorse. There was no soft fragrance, only bone-chilling coldness. All of a sudden, the little wildfire that rose in Colin's heart was completely extinguished. The female mage stiffly shrank into Colin's arms, as if looking for warmth and support. Bliss looked at Colin with a slightly warning gaze, then turned to reorganize the team and prepare to leave. "Sorry, Knight Colin, my angels have used too much magic and are a little tired. That's why I need to trouble you." "Don't say that, you are only like this because you want to help us get out of danger. Don't worry, I will take good care of you." The team set off again. As the speed was not slow, the horse's back was very bumpy. The female mage's body was weak, and she almost completely relied on Colin's embrace to not fall. "Are you okay?" Colin could feel the female mage in his arms trembling slightly, so he whispered into her ear, "Do you need me to slow down?" "It's all right, there's no need for that." The female mage gritted her teeth. "We have to leave this place as soon as possible." "All right." The journey was bumpy, and the two of them were stuck close to each other, so it was inevitable that there would be some friction. Then Colin awkwardly discovered that all the blood in his body seemed to be converging towards a certain part of his body. It seemed that vampires had that ability as well. "I'll write it down when I have the time." Fortunately, Colin could now freely control the flow of blood in his body. He took the initiative to disperse the concentrated blood in a certain part of his body again to avoid embarrassment. "What's your name?" In order to distract himself, Colin asked. The female sorceress hesitated for a moment before she replied, "Vera," but she didn't say her surname. Colin raised his eyebrows. "Flower of Truth? Do you even understand the Elvish language?" Vera asked in surprise. "Of course. This is a necessary skill for an elegant aristocrat," Colin replied casually. In fact, this was just some knowledge that the butler, Eamon, wanted to enhance the style of the Angeli family. Therefore, he tried his best to force some knowledge into Colin's head. However, Colin only learned a little bit of the Elvish language, and he could barely be regarded as a dabbler. Therefore, he was just like a blind cat that bumped into a dead mouse. "I knew Coimus Quivi, Laurel in Lucamula." A series of elvish words came out of Vera's mouth. The elves were the first race to learn how to use the arcane energy. Therefore, many of their spells had to be recited in the elvish language. Therefore, the elvish language had become a must-learn language for all the mages. However, Colin was caught off guard. Vera was in a good mood when she saw Colin's awkward expression. What an arrogant woman. What? Vera suddenly frowned. What language did you just speak? Take a guess. Colin smiled proudly. Of course, he would not tell Vera that he was speaking Chinese just now. It sounds a bit like the Kunya language, Vera guessed. However, she immediately shook her head. That is impossible. The Kunya language was the exclusive language of the High Elves. However, it had already disappeared from the world like the High Elves. The current elves and the Naga Sirens were actually the descendants of the High Elves. Therefore, whether it was to trace the footsteps of their ancestors or to explore the ancient arcane books that no one could understand, the Kunya language had always been the focus of the two races and the mages' research. Unfortunately, the results of thousands of years of research were only enough to piece together the pronunciation of a few dozen words. Therefore, Vera felt that it was impossible for Colin, who could not even speak the Elvish language fluently, to know the Kunya language. However, the pronunciation of the words that he just spoke was very similar to the pronunciation of the words that they had deciphered so far. What kind of language is the Kunya language? This was the first time that Colin had heard of this term. Vera secretly said, as expected. It used to be the exclusive language of the High Elves, but it has long been lost. Colin responded casually, and then he curiously asked, how did the High Elves disappear? Has the Mage Council found anything? Vera shook her head. It has been too long, and the only ancient book that may have recorded what happened at that time was written in the Kunya language. Colin rolled his eyes, and he seriously doubted the ability of these mages to decipher the language. But Vera wanted to say something but hesitated. But what? However, the Mage Council has some speculations. Tell me about it. The time when the dragons and the High Elves disappeared was about 5,000 years ago, and the god of light, the god of war, the goddess of fate, the god of storm, and other gods began to spread their faith around the same time. Therefore, there is likely to be a connection between the two. How dare you make wild guesses about the god of light? Colin interrupted forcefully. He had to do this. Although he felt that Vera's speculations were somewhat reasonable, and he did not have much respect for the so-called gods, as a knight, he had to stand his ground. This was his persona. Otherwise, he would be ostracized by the entire noble class. Vera obviously felt that she was a little silly, and she actually discussed this issue with a fanatical knight. She sighed, and it seemed that she had lost interest in talking. Colin also stopped talking, and he pretended to be offended. As time went by, Colin found that the body in his arms gradually became warmer. Obviously, the female mage was gradually recovering from the arcane spell that she had lost control of. However, this way, the physical friction between the two of them became even more erotic. Colin had to work harder to control his blood and not gather in a certain place where it should not be gathered. Even so, the faint fragrance of the rose continued to enter his nose, stirring up his restless heart. Finally, when the sky gradually darkened, the team stopped to rest, and Colin got off the horse with relief. However, at the same time, he felt a little reluctant. Thank you so much for your help today, Knight Colin. You are welcome. Colin bowed, and after taking a few steps, he turned around and asked, by the way, what did you mean by that sentence in the Elvish language? Vera hesitated for a moment before she said, I believe in the truth, not the lies. Understood. Colin nodded with a smile, turned around, and left. Vera lied. Colin happened to know the last word in the Elvish language. However, Colin did not expose Vera's lie because he understood that she had lied to him because she wanted to take care of his feelings. The last word in the Elvish language was not a lie, but a god. Therefore, the real meaning of the sentence that Vera had said in the Elvish language was, believe in the truth, not the gods. Chapter 17. The blood of the troll warriors cannot be used to enhance one's strength. Colin was writing on the parchment under the faint morning light. That's right, he had drunk all the troll warrior's blood last night, but he didn't see any strange reaction from his body. Did it have to be the blood of a knight? Colin was a little depressed as he looked around the camp. Knight Raymond was sitting not far away from Colin, sipping water in small sips. This is not good. After all, he is my loyal servant. Knight Bliss was urging everyone to hurry up and get ready to leave. This is not good either. Maybe I can go to the Mirror Lake battlefield to take a look. However, the battle has been going on for so long. Even if the corpses were not eaten by the beasts, they would have already become dry corpses. A familiar fragrance wafted over, interrupting Colin's wild thoughts. Good morning, Knight Colin. Good morning, Miss Vera. Colin looked at the female wizard standing gracefully in front of him, a smile involuntarily appearing on his face. You look much better today. How do you feel? Do you need any help? No, I should be able to do it myself today. Okay, if you need anything, just let me know. During the conversation, Colin's eyes gradually shifted to Vera's white and slender neck. He suddenly thought of something. He did not know if the mage's blood would work. Vera also noticed that Colin was staring at her neck. She immediately felt a little embarrassed and gave him a fierce glare. She said coquettishly, "Let's go quickly. Knight Bliss is already urging us." Colin mounted his horse and moved to Vera's side, walking side by side with her. Intimate physical contact was the best way to get closer to a man and a woman. Of course, Colin was very clear about this. After riding together yesterday, he was convinced that he had already occupied a place in Vera's heart. Perhaps, even she herself was not aware of this point. Vera was not really angry and she was talking and laughing with Colin again. The group continued north, and as expected, the journey was much more peaceful. They didn't encounter any more troll armies. There were only a few ignorant bandits and some reckless beasts, but they were all easily dealt with by Knight Bliss. It seemed that Colin's plan was indeed effective. They had temporarily shaken off their pursuers. In order to conserve horsepower, the team gradually slowed down. Colin also took the opportunity to quickly familiarize himself with Vera. However, he still couldn't find out the other party's true identity. She only knew that she had just returned to the northern frontier from Yevil, and when she passed by Mirror Lake, she happened to meet a mercenary group that had received an emergency recruitment order from Marquis Charles, so she followed them to Mirror Lake Camp. Yevil, also known as the Arcane City, was located between the eastern border of the Empire of Light and the Radiant Moon Forest. It used to be the territory of the elves, but after they retreated to the Radiant Moon Forest, it was occupied by the mages. Nominally, Yevil belonged to the Empire of Light, but the highest authority in the city was the Parliament of Mages. Neither the Duke of the Eastern Region nor the Emperor of the Empire of Light had any actual control over the Arcane City. Through the conversation, he learned that Vera had gone to Yevil to learn arcane magic when she was very young. So far, she had not returned to the northern frontier for more than 10 years. Her familiarity with the city was even worse than Colin, who had received the memory of his predecessor. Moreover, Vera took the initiative to go to Mirror Lake Camp to help when she saw the emergency recruitment order from Marquis Charles. It could be seen that she had a very close relationship with the House of St. Hilda. There were indeed some nobles who liked to find a mage to accompany them when they went to war. After all, although a mage was not good in a one-on-one battle, they were very useful on the battlefield. However, considering the contradiction between the nobles and the mages, most of the arrogant mages would ignore the nobles. Even if there were a few mages who were willing to accept the employment of the nobles, they would generally offer a very high price. It was simply unheard of for a mage like Vera to take the initiative to help when she saw the recruitment order. In the evening, the team set up camp again to rest. However, it did not take long for the scouts to come back and report the situation. "Sir Bliss, we have found traces of a small group of humans in front of us. We suspect that they are the defeated soldiers who escaped from the Mirror Lake battlefield." Defeated soldiers? Bring them over. When they heard that there were defeated soldiers who escaped from the Mirror Lake battlefield in front of them, Colin and Vera hurriedly followed them. Now, They urgently needed to know the situation at the Mirror Lake battlefield and whether Marquis Charles's plan had succeeded or not. When the suspected defeated soldiers were brought to the camp, Colin discovered that there was actually an old acquaintance among them. "Respected knight, do you still remember me? I am Sar from the Firefox Mercenaries. You were the one who personally handed me the emergency recruitment order from Marquis Charles." Bliss looked at Sar, who was in a sorry state among the defeated soldiers, and immediately remembered who this person was. There was nothing he could do about it. After all, this filial son had killed his father and joined the army, leaving a deep impression on him. "How is the situation at Mirror Lake Camp?" "Terrible. It's too terrible." Sar immediately burst into tears. "There are too many trolls in the mountains. They are killing everyone they see. We can't fight them at all. Many of our brothers have died." Sob, sob. "If I hadn't jumped into the lake when I saw the situation, I am afraid that I would have died." "Did you see the army led by Marquis Charles?" "Marquis Charles?" Sar thought for a moment before he said, Yes, we did see a golden lion flag appear behind the troll army, but what?" "Stop hemming and hawing." Bliss scolded impatiently. Sar did not dare to hesitate anymore. He had no choice but to tell the truth. "But the army led by Marquis Charles seems to have retreated." Everyone fell silent immediately. Retreated? This was obviously Sar's way of saying it. The real situation was that they had retreated. This bad news made everyone a little confused for a while. They did not expect that they would have to face an even more terrifying troll army right after they got rid of their pursuers. Just as everyone was still digesting this bad news, Bliss suddenly asked, "Are there any pursuers behind you?" Sar quickly replied, "No. There was indeed a small troll army chasing after us in the first few days, but they gradually disappeared. Maybe they don't think that we are important anymore." Bliss was relieved. He turned around and looked at Vera. "Miss, what should we do next?" Vera hesitated for a moment before she subconsciously turned to look at Colin. Colin had gradually become the person she relied on because he had successfully helped everyone get rid of their pursuers. Colin glanced at the group of defeated soldiers and lowered his voice. "We still have to find out the whereabouts of the troll army before we can make further plans. However, the first thing we have to do now is to get rid of this group of defeated soldiers." "But they're also humans," Vera cried out in alarm. Colin rolled his eyes and patiently explained in a low voice, "The reason we were able to shake off the pursuers before was because we are all cavalry and have high mobility. Now, if we don't abandon these two-legged soldiers, Sir Knight, the Firefox mercenaries were almost wiped out in the battle at the Mirror Lake. However, I am still willing to follow you and avenge our brothers who have died." Sar seemed to have realized something, and he immediately shouted loudly. Moreover, under his incitement, many of the defeated soldiers also began to shout. "That's right. Avenge our brothers. Sir, please lead us back. Don't abandon us. Revenge. Revenge." Seeing that many of the cavalry soldiers were also incited, Colin had no choice but to shut up. He then looked at Vera with a serious expression, hoping that she would make the right choice. However, Vera looked at Colin and said, "They are also my companions. I will not abandon them." After that, she turned around and calmed down the excited soldiers. Colin sighed helplessly and frowned as he looked at the filial son. Sir also looked at him. As soon as the two of them met each other's eyes, they immediately looked away. "You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.